The story begins with a boy and a girl who were simply sitting carefree under a huge tree in the village. The boy finished reading the book and loudly announced that he had finally decided to become the greatest traveler ever seen. The girl disagrees. She tightly clenches her clothes and exclaims that it is unfair because she will be the first. The boy looks a little surprised for a second, but then simply gives her a broad, confident smile. She does not back down and says even more decisively, "They will both be the first, the best adventurer duo ever." This makes her laugh and joyfully exclaim about their great future together. Fast forward a bit, the leaderboard, covered with names and scores, and all the way at the bottom, RD place. The boy stands looking completely broken and sweaty, staring intently at the board. He falls to the ground and loses his head, shouting that he has not become better at all, and it turns out he has been last for 4 years in a row. While he is bent over in shame, people around whisper and laugh at him, wondering how he can even lose to complete beginners. People near the guild do nothing but mock the boy and advise him to quit everything and become a farmer. They even gave him a nickname, Essen, the eternal last in rank. But while he sat there, the guild system does not stand still. Adventure rankings are automatically updated every morning at dawn, recalculating each person's place based on their new achievements and scores. This is a big deal because on the board are written the names of all active adventurers currently listed in the guild, and it is clearly visible who is in which place. Despite the mockery, the boy finds a second wind, encourages himself, and shouts that he must pull himself together right now. He cannot afford to give up. His entire appearance changes. He raises his gaze and quietly, confidently smiles as if he has finally refocused. Moving through the crowd, he reminds himself that he must keep the promise made to his friend. Suddenly, at the front edge of the scoreboard, a wild uproar rises. Someone, completely shocked, exclaims that some adventurer has just shot up to 9th place. The crowd buzzes about the Ice Princess. Polaris people are going crazy over how she climbs the ranks faster than anyone in the history of the guild. Nearby, a boy starts acting as if he knew this from the very beginning, boasting to his friends. She is special, her aura is on a completely different level. The group turns around and feels goosebumps, wondering why the boy from the last place is standing and smiling at them. But he doesn't care. He tells himself it's time to get to work. The guys in the guild continue throwing insults and laughing, saying they recently saw that boy rummaging through the trash behind a restaurant. They mock him, saying he is the complete opposite of a star like Polaris, and even when they look at him, it seems to them he smells like garbage. And the main bully tells his friend that they better run away from here before that loser boy's energy starts bothering them. Even hearing these words, the boy is silent, standing with a forced smile and waiting for the group to finally leave him alone. As soon as they leave, he slaps his cheeks to sober up, repeating to himself that he is used to this and there is no point in worrying anymore. He looks at the city walls and tries to cheer himself up, promising to do his best today as on any other day. Eventually, he made his way to the ruins at the edge of the territory, where the air is heavy and still. He freezes at the entrance to the Forest of White, missed a low-level F-rank dungeon, and prepares to step into the foggy strip of trees. In the depths of the forest, he sees a pack of horned rabbits, and everything becomes truly dangerous when a predator suddenly jumps out of the shadows. Clamping its jaws with a click, it knocked down one of the smaller creatures right in front of him. The boy hides behind a tree and looks back at the forest where the predator just lunged. He exhaled, mentally repeating to himself how close it was. He was surprised to realize it was a forest wolf cub, and they usually travel in packs, and was stunned that it handled the agile rabbit so easily. It all begins with ancient legends about a war between the gods and the demon god. The battle ended in a draw, but not before the demon god used his last power to curse the land with monsters. To fight back, the gods built dungeons with their own power and sealed those monsters inside. They create giant barriers all over the earth to protect the surface from what hides below. The gods could not stay, so they gave people special powers, gifts, so they could protect their world. They led people forward, thus the Adventurers Guild and the ranking system were born, which are still used today. Now adventurers fight monsters inside all their lives, so that the growing swarms do not break out and destroy everything. The boy returns to work, his hand reaching for the ground to pull out another blade of grass. He looks at the plant and thinks that probably only he here is really trying to make a living just by gathering such things. He began to eat the grass right there, thinking about his strange ability, the Monster Eater. It is quite a useless gift. It just allows him to eat anything and not get sick, as if he were some kind of monster, and he does not know how much longer he will have to endure this nonsense. Walking through the forest, he feels miserable because earlier he had to run away from a weak F-rank monster scent. Looking at the dry, trash-like food in his hand, he whispered to himself that at least it saves a little on food, but then Suddenly a loud scream sounded among the trees. He froze with a piece in his mouth, looking completely confused like. When someone calls for help, he quickly peeks out from behind a tree trunk to see what is happening. I come across a girl pressed to the ground. She is sobbing and trembling, and right above her looms a huge dark beast. He does not believe his eyes, it is so huge, and he suddenly realizes that he is looking at a real adult forest wolf. The wolf lets out a muffled roar, bears sharp fangs, and saliva drips from its mouth. This makes the girl break free. She screams at the top of her lungs, asking if there is anyone there who can hear her. But the wolf just lunges forward, pushes her into the mud, and pins her to the ground. The boy shouts to get her attention, and she raises her eyes through tears, finally noticing someone there. He does not even hesitate, he just throws himself right into that trouble. The realization of this is the worst possible situation. He has no combat skills. He looks around hoping to see another adventurer, but there is no one. But there is no one around. He clenches his fist so tightly and wishes that anyone was here to help him. The girl is completely frightened, sobbing and begging for help while the monster looms over her. The boy still steps forward and delivers a heavy blow right to the wolf's snout, knocking it back. Then he shouts at her to get up as fast as possible and asks if she can even run at all. The wolf snapped its jaws, and with a disgusting growl the boy froze in place. The girl glances at the door and apologizes her leg is too injured to move. She cannot believe this is happening. The monster lunges at her, and she screams as it approaches. She wonders if her life is truly over and calls for help, hating the thought of dying in such a low-level dungeon. The beast bites directly into the boy's arm, but in his mind only the promise he made and the thought that he has not yet reached his goal. He says to the monster, "Give me your strongest hit," although inside he panics, afraid to die so easily. Looking straight into the wolf's jaws, he screamed again, searching for the strength to do something. The wolf bit even harder, blood splattered everywhere, and the boy took the blow, leaving the girl just to watch and scream, completely terrified at the sight of him being torn to pieces. And at that very moment the wolf let out a strange squeak, and instead blood began to spurt from it. Suddenly a system message flashed before his eyes. He had just picked up a large fang of a forest wolf, and the boy almost loses his mind, asking himself if this was truly a divine message. He knows this usually happens when a gift awakens, but he cannot understand why it is finally happening now. The girl looks at him, her voice trembling with worry, and asks if he is still okay. The boy is completely confused for a second, but still manages to tell her that he mostly feels fine. But everything quickly goes wrong. The wolf attacks them again, and the boy groans in pain, trying to move while the beast closes the distance. Suddenly something hits the wolf so hard that blood splatters, and it is thrown back. They left the boy standing there with blood on his face. He looked as if this fight had completely exhausted him. He looks at his broken knife lying on the ground and realizes an ordinary blade has no chance against such fangs. He begins to think that he needs something much stronger if he is going to survive. And then something clicks in his head. He remembers the message about obtaining a wolf's fang and suddenly understands. He heard it exactly at the moment he bit through the monster's tongue. The boy is in complete shock, looks at his hands, and cannot believe this is really happening. But he decides it is worth trying. He does not retreat, stands his ground, and calls on his gift to work just as the wolf approaches, and then suddenly a huge surge of power bursts through the boy. He understands what is happening and lunges forward at the beast. He delivers a heavy downward blow with such force that it completely shatters the monster. He landed perfectly, and behind him in the thicket of the forest, the wolf fell dead. With blood still on his face, the boy cannot believe that he really succeeded. He whispers to himself that he really did it, and the girl just stands in complete admiration and says how incredible he was with. This sharply pulls him out of his confusion. He jumps up and rushes to her to check if everything is okay. He asks if she is all right, and it is clear that he is worried about her injured leg, but she just looks at him and says that everything is fine because he saved her. She broke into a huge smile and sincerely thanked him for everything he had done. He was completely confused. Scratching his head, he thinks that this is the first time since he became an adventurer that someone has thanked him at all, and the girl just looks at him as if he is a weirdo. They sit down for a moment to catch their breath. The girl says that he is really incredibly strong, introduces herself as Essen, and asks why he constantly calls himself the lowest in rank if he can fight like that. The boy sits there looking quite depressed and says that he knows and that maybe everything is not as he thought. Yua apologizes for the confusion, says that she only recently became an adventurer, and introduces herself with a huge smile. The boy just looks at her, repeating the word converted over and over, as if hearing it for the first time. Yua explains that until recently she was just a simple farmer, but in these forests she had to solve very important matters. It turned out that in this world there are many gods, for example, the god of travelers who gives adventurers special gifts and the right to clear dungeons. Then merchants receive their perks from the god of wealth, and farmers like her are helped by the god of harvest. Everyone has their own special benefits. Yua says that if such a strong guy like him ended up at the very bottom of the ranking, then the life of a traveler is much tougher than she imagined, and the guy only barely laughs. Before looking at his hands and admitting that this was actually the first time he managed to make his gift work at all. Yua's jaw dropped. She asked in surprise if he would really jump. The guy froze, staring into the thicket of trees, and realized that he had probably been looking at his power the wrong way all this time. The guy sits and thinks about his power, realizing that his gift is not just the ability to eat a lot as he thought. It turned out that after eating that wolf's tongue, his gift awakened for the first time. He suddenly wonders, is he stealing monsters' unique abilities when he eats them? US says that's exactly how it happens. He had already tried eating monster meat both cooked and raw, but nothing worked, so he decided that the secret was to eat it while it was still fresh. The idea of becoming much stronger finally dawns on him, and he shines with anticipation of new possibilities. And then he suddenly changes his tone and directly asks Yua what she was really doing in these forests. He suddenly notices that he is too excited, starts laughing, and wonders if he is getting ahead of himself. The guy admits that a young man stuck at the very bottom of the ranks is unlikely to do much, but Eva quietly whispers that this is definitely not the case. He looked at her and called her by name, trying to understand what she was thinking. She becomes completely serious and says that she knows it's a lot to ask since he just saved her, but she needs a huge favor from him. Yua looks him straight in the eyes and unexpectedly asks for something huge. She needs him to kill the forest cat. The boy can hardly believe what he hears and only repeats the name of the monster to her. She explains that she needs a rare mushroom that grows on the head of that creature, but she has no money for a real quest. She admits that she can't manage on her own, but the boy says to wait, because that creature is the strongest monster in the entire forest. Yua falls into despair and begs him, saying that this is the only way to find medicine for her mother. Even hearing this, the boy remains standing and looks at her. He finally dares and tells her that it is simply impossible, causing her to freeze, and he immediately apologizes, feeling awkward and hurt that he even inquired about her situation if he only intended to refuse. He tries to explain that his early victory was accidental, the body reacted instinctively, so he was just lucky. The boy closes his eyes and says that suddenly facing such a powerful monster is more than he can endure. Together they stand in a quiet glade for just a moment, and then Yua clenches her fist and tells him that she understands, smiling sadly and apologizing for asking him to do something so crazy. She turns around without saying a word and returns back into the dense thicket herself. So Essence spoke and asked the boy if he was really ready to let her go, forcing him to say her name E. For a moment the forest became silent as the girl disappeared into the distance. Suddenly Yua speeds up, her feet pound the ground, and she rushes through the bushes. She grips a wooden stick as a weapon and thinks, if I don't do something soon, Mom is finished. Tears hit her face, she screams and swings the stick at the trees, trying to appear brave. Just then the boy bursts through the forest behind her, shouting, Yua, wait, because he suddenly realizes that he can't leave it like this, and shouts that he's sorry he was completely wrong when he said no. The boy says he can handle the forest cat himself. He's not entirely sure if he'll succeed, but USA starts crying, saying that her selfishness put Essen in danger. He tells her she's wrong and why. And he shouts that he was covering himself with his gift all the time, it was a complete excuse to escape. He wants to stop behaving like that right now. He clenches his fist and says, if I don't do this, my idol will just laugh at me. Yua just froze and looks at him, she is stunned by his words. The boy quietly smiled at her and asked Yua to find some safe place to wait it out, so finally she lets go of everything and cries even harder, but it feels like a relief. Her voice echoed through the quiet trees as she said to him, thank you, and she remains alone in the forest, trying to wipe the tears from her face. She feels bad thinking that she is selfish, although Essen is probably just as scared as she is. Essen looks around with a scratched face and a pang in his heart, wondering if he can help somehow. She rushes through the dense forest, trying to return to the fight. She resolutely tells herself that she can no longer just rely on Yua, it's time to take matters into her own hands and act. Nearby, by the huge entrance to the cave, a loud sound suddenly came from the darkness. The forest cat is just sitting inside and looks completely calm, although in reality it is a huge monster. But the boy appears at the entrance and loudly shouts that he has been walking in this dungeon for 4 years and knows every place where they sleep here. He stands his ground and firmly says that he will never climb the higher steps until he defeats it, so he challenges the cat, show what you're capable of. The boy rushed forward with a knife, shouting that the first strike will decide everything. He flies through the air at a furious speed, looking for any chance to hit the beast accurately. But suddenly the cat disappears and the boy is left completely confused, trying to understand where it went. The forest cat lunges with a growl and directs its power straight into the boy's blade. The strike throws everyone into the air, and the boy slides across the rough floor of the cave, just managing to stay on his feet. He cannot believe his eyes, it moves so fast that with every motion it tears deep furrows in the ground. He grits his teeth and decides that he must force himself even harder not to fall behind. The beast fell from above like a blurred shadow, but the boy reacted instantly, swinging his weapon to meet the attack, only for the cat to jump back onto the ledge and quietly meow, as if it hadn't even tried. The boy loses patience, his new strength is useless if he cannot hit the target. And it gets even worse when the cat starts moving so fast that he can barely see it anymore. Suddenly he realizes that the monster has been just playing with them all this time. And before he can react, the beast strikes a powerful blow that throws him off balance. The boy cannot believe the power standing before him. He shouts that this monster cannot possibly be just an F-rank threat because the forest cat moves like a blurred shadow. Its strike is so heavy that it throws the boy backward. He hits the rough cave wall with a dull thud and wonders if he would have had better chances if he had just prepared better for this. But hitting the ground, he tries to clear his head and find a way out of this mess. Sweaty and scratched all over, he realizes he can do nothing until he finds a way to match the insane speed of that creature. And just when he is almost losing hope, someone calls his name. He looks up and sees a familiar figure standing there. It's Yua. The boy is completely stunned. She appeared right in the middle of danger. He asks her what she is even doing here, and the cat monster just looks at the two of them. Yura explains that she really wanted to help him and proudly shows the trap she set, using a local rabbit as bait. But right during the conversation, she loses her balance and falls, leaving the poor rabbit as confused as everyone else. The boy grabs the forest rabbit and holds it tightly, looking completely stunned when he realizes that this tiny creature is a monster known for its crazy leg strength. When the forest cat lunged at him, the boy smiled and jokingly thought, "I hope this strange connection doesn't just make my ears bigger." And then he pushes off, rushing so fast that the ground behind him seems to explode. Suddenly, a system message appears. It says he has just mastered the skill, Fast Paws of the Forest Rabbit. He spun in the air, kicked up a cloud of dust, and shouted a quick thank you to Lua for the help. As his new speed started to work, he looks straight ahead and whispers to himself that he can really do this. So he dashed like a blurred shadow, racing around the monster until the whole area was covered with light trails. He notices a vulnerable spot and strikes with all his might. Blood flies. Finally, he delivers a powerful, precise blow to the creature. Even when blood splashes on him, the boy just smiles and without stopping moves forward to finish the fight. Essence stands frozen, completely stunned, expressionless face. She tries to comprehend what she just saw. Meanwhile, the boy simply wipes blood from his face, says thank you for the food, and acts as if it's no big deal. Essen couldn't hold back and lunged at him, exclaiming how incredible he is. While the boy, shocked, calls her by name. He can't believe he actually knocked down a forest cat. He tells her to wait a second. Sweat appears on him, and he suddenly realizes how close she got. She immediately loses her head, apologizes and stammers, saying she was just too excited and didn't mean to hug him like that. Trying to change the subject, she winks and asks him what the cat finally brought him. The boy repeats her words. His face grows serious. He thinks about that new power he feels. He says he's quite sure. As soon as energy began to form on his fingers, a voice sounded, pronouncing the name of the skill, Sharp Claw. Suddenly, he accidentally releases the power. It cuts through the ground and cave walls with deep, huge scars. Essence just smiles, looking at the destruction, and says that he really finds it hard to control that devouring power of his. The boy somewhat awkwardly shows his new claws and tells the girls that he's doing this for the first time, so they shouldn't expect too much yet. He instantly activates that power and with one clean strike cuts through a thick mushroom stem in the middle of the forest. He extends the cap and tells you that these are the very mushrooms he promised her for her mother's treatment. Yua looks down and promises to somehow repay this favor someday, and the boy just says don't worry, he's simply glad she came to help. But he becomes more serious and asks her to keep his gift a secret, because most people consider monsters only enemies. He jokes to himself, if someone found out about his strange power, they would even start bullying him, and Essen agrees that would definitely be a real mess. Yua smiled broadly and said she understood, but would never forget how kind he was to her. The boy just waved it off with a smile and said to her, hurry, take those mushrooms to your mother. She shines with happiness, thanks him sincerely one last time, tightly grips the bag and sets off home. Standing there alone, the boy realizes, even if he is still completely last in the ranking, he is finally truly at the start of his journey. The boy is fired up and tells all the travelers he has yet to meet, just wait for me. And he also calls Polaris, saying he is coming for her while she stands in some crazy volcanic wasteland. He is determined to become the #1 adventurer, even if he is currently sitting at 96,000th place. True Power steps onto the stage, treading on cracked earth in heavy armor, and everyone around instantly notices this. They whisper and nudge their friends. Look who just came in. The guys who were looking at her froze. They suddenly realized that the Ice Princess Polaris herself was walking past them. They simply can't believe she returned so soon. The volcano district, where she was too dangerous even for ranked teams. Polaris herself stands before a huge decorated frame and just looks at what is in front of her. The crowd erupted in panic. The name of some guy simply disappeared from the rankings overnight, and everyone was wondering where he went. Polaris only sighs under her breath, thinking how truly hard it is to climb higher in the ranks when you are already at the top. The crowd is still buzzing about that missing name, and the muscular adventurer next to Polaris shrugged, as if to say he's probably just some minor rank infile, and people constantly drop off the list like that, but this creepy blonde who interrupted the conversation has a different view. He smiles and says there are actually only 2 ways a name gets erased from the rankings, according to him. Either you leave this life forever and give up being an adventurer, or eventually you die. Polaris is not moved at all by his grim words. She just looks at him challengingly and dryly asks about his own well-being. And that guy just waved his hand and told her that whatever happened to that missing person, it's none of their business. Suddenly he changes his tone and starts flirting, saying she is as beautiful as ever and advises not to worry about those worthless people, but to go have tea with him. But Polaris immediately cut him off coldly. She said directly that she did not need him. The boy froze completely by surprise and began to boast that he was 73rd in the ranking, trying to convince her that joining his party would be a huge boost for her. Polaris did not even slow down and said that she did not need it. She left him standing there like a loser, and he tries to convince himself that she is just flirting. Polaris looked back one last time and threw the cold truth in his face. The only reason she does not want to unite with him is that he is much weaker than her. The boy lowered his eyes when he was called a true battle maniac, obsessed with gifts. Suddenly Polaris caught something in the air and turned around. What she saw completely stunned her. In the middle of a huge wall covered with shining ancient runes stands a girl. The boy tightly grips his sword and tells Essence that she is wrong. He knows himself better than anyone, and is not who he just seems to be, but Essence just looks back, completely stunned and cannot believe what is happening. Her eyes filled with tears as the ranking updated right before her, and showed that Essence officially reached the 90,000th place. Polaris turns and walks away, her cloak catching the wind, and she watches closely what is happening behind her. In the hall, the boy shouts with joy and looks even more excited than ever. And the other adventurers nearby just look at him. One wonders what's wrong with him, and the bald one asks if he has finally lost his mind, but even when the girl asks him to stop shouting and calls him an eternal loser, the boy just smiles and says that his rating has finally risen. The boy with the ponytail just froze in shock. He can't believe that the guy is actually serious about this. The crowd began to hate him and ask what dirty tricks he used to climb the ranks, since rank 90,000 is still quite low. And they don't calm down, saying that anyone can get such a skin, just kill a few weak monsters, and they tell him to stop showing off like that. One of them even digs deeper, saying the only reason he rose at all is that he simply outran people who are already inactive. A woman passing by told him, "If you're so excited about a tiny jump in the rating, then in the real world you will never survive." And the one with the ponytail adds that since he was a loser for so long, his reputation won't change overnight, no matter what. The boy just scratched his head, laughed, and admitted that he is really right about where he stands. He sarcastically thanks them for the insults and promises to work even harder. No little breeze will go to his head. But then he starts thinking about his gift and the fact that he will have to visit various dungeons, although so far he has only been to one. He realizes he won't figure it out on his own, so he heads to the guild counter to talk to the people behind it. The receptionist greets him with a broad smile, introduces herself as Lulu, and asks how she can help him today, which me. This immediately makes Essen think how sweet she is, while he explains that he is looking for a recommendation for a dungeon of E rank. While she listens, he can't help but notice how refined and intelligent the guild members look compared to the rough adventurers he usually sees. Lulu politely nods and says she has everything, asks to wait a moment while she takes a look. Essen constantly goes crazy in his thoughts. She is kind even to a low-rank guy like him, and without a doubt the most beautiful girl he has seen. He stands there with a dazed look and only thinks about how pleasant she smelled when she spoke to him. Suddenly Lulu lifts her eyes from the papers and asks if he is Essen, and this completely catches him off guard because he didn't even expect that she would know his name at all, so he just froze, looked embarrassed, and quietly said yes, that's him. She suddenly becomes a little shy, realizes she probably rushed, and explains that he is actually quite well known among the lower-level guilds. Essen understands that he has a reputation as a guy who has been stuck at the bottom for years, so he just laughs and says he understands. Lulu smiles warmly and says that she was pleasantly surprised by the ratings this morning, and truly happy his hard work has finally paid off. Essen smiles broadly and thanks her, mentally admiring how incredible she is, but Lulu suddenly stops him with a serious look, and she leans in very close and warns him. People usually let their guard down exactly when they think everything is finally going their way, so he needs to be careful. He shows her a thumbs up and assures her that he can handle it, still with the same happy smile on his face because it's time to get down to business, so she starts laying out all the different quest papers on the counter. She begins reviewing the options, looking for the one that will fit him perfectly, and then she points to the resting cemetery and explains that the undead there are slow and easy for a beginner to handle. Next, she mentions the Ochre Crossing, a popular place where you can earn well because it's full of abandoned relics. She also brings up the Wandering Caves. There are rare materials there, but warns, you can't handle it alone, so Essen reviews the list, immediately rejects the undead because he definitely doesn't want to eat them and decides to stay away from crowds and places where he can't manage alone. Essen paused for a second, then said he would really like to go somewhere not crowded and not too popular. So Lulu flips through a pile of papers, pulls out one page, and asks what he thinks about this particular option. She introduces him to the Murasame swamps, showing him every detail of this area while he explained that there is almost no competition there. The monsters are fairly common, and the materials sell for a high price because they are hard to find. Essen gets a determined look, and he says that he has already made his choice. He tells her that he is really glad he asked for her advice, and she replies, "Come anytime," even tossing a few helpful tips to assist. He heads to the door, waves back, and shouts a brief thank you while she smiles widely at him and winks, wishing him luck in future battles. He covers the path and sets his foot on the rocky ground at the entrance. Essen looks at the landscape and realizes he has finally reached the Arank Murasame swamps. The boy glances back for a second and realizes what he is dealing with. Bubbles suddenly start to bubble up from the murky water a moment before he falls and begins to scream, splashing. He sits on the shore, wipes mud from his feet, and grumbles that it's obvious why no one wants to come here. But suddenly something in the distance catches his eye. He notices a bunch of plants he has never seen before and realizes with amazement. This area is literally filled with rare materials. He pulls out a magic bag he received in exchange from the forest cat and knows. Inside there is extra space so he can take as much as he wants. He starts rushing, thinking that at this pace he can gather a huge catch until something slippery wraps around him completely, and he screams from surprise. It's a swamp frog looking him in the eyes, and the boy can't help but think how disgusting it is. Knowing that although these creatures are the weakest monsters in the dungeon, they are still filled with poison. The boy cuts the monster through, calling it a total trash mob while he sees another frog trying to jump away and rushes after it, shouting, "Wait." He freezes as soon as he grabs the prey, standing over the remains of his victim. Holding a slippery tongue in his hand, he decided that his main goal is to expand the gift. He just lunges, grabs, and eats raw meat, thinking everything is going great. Until a system message pops up that he received a whip-like frog tongue. He finished eating and wiped his mouth, feeling quite satisfied. But suddenly a sharp pain runs through his neck, catching him off guard, and he grabbed his throat when a strange dark sensation began to engulf him. He starts to scream, his throat burns like fire, and he cannot believe that it really burns so intensely. The boy falls to the ground, clutching his chest, and thinks that he is really in trouble because he cannot even breathe. He quickly grabs the bottle and swallows its contents to the bottom to stop the reaction. He held his breath and suddenly realized that he had completely let his guard down. It turned out his gift as a monster devourer does not stop poison. So fortunately, he took an antidote with him. Looking at his trembling hand, he understood. These gifts are not as all-powerful as he imagined. And he sits in the dirt and thinks that Lulu's warning turned out to be 100% right. He forces himself to smile and tells himself that he has plenty of spirit for a boy who only has an E rank. Then he casts a watchful glance at the dead monster nearby and carefully surveys the surroundings. He pulls out his guidebook and looks for the next target, his thoughts focused on one thing: to find the strongest ability possible. But he knows if it turns out to be too strong, he will not be able to kill it, and he has no antidotes, so the next meal must be safe. At that moment, he notices something moving near the ruins in the distance, and involuntarily wonders what it could be. The boy lunged forward, thinking that this target was not poisonous and could really give him some good scale skills. He notices Whale End and the lizard ahead and decides, this time the first strike will be his. Approaching, he decides it's just the right time to test that new ability he just acquired. He launches the whale and frog whip tongue, sending a long fleshy lash straight at the monster. It grips perfectly, wrapping around the lizard's neck and pinning its paws. With a powerful jerk, he hurled the creature into the ground. The blow was so strong that the soil cracked. But he sees the lizard simply curl up into a ball and realizes its skin is much tougher than he thought. Before he could land the next strike, the monster hit back powerfully, rolling him over the stones and leaving. The lizard loomed over him, growling loudly while he tried to recover. However, he does not retreat. He believes he can still snatch victory if he bites through that armor with his fangs. Suddenly, a notification appeared. He just acquired the whale and lizard blade tail. The boy stands there looking completely different with monster claws and a huge tail ready for action. Lizards in front of him begin to hiss, trying to look fierce and circling around him, but the boy just smiles and says that their tails are worth their weight in gold, so he definitely takes them. He fixed his gaze on the thick scales on the lizard's back, and then suddenly dashed forward at full speed. With one clean move, he pierces the monster through, and its pieces scatter in all directions. When the blood splattered, a wild gleam appeared in the boy's eyes, and he says that he is actually having fun. He realized that every time he eats one of these things, his body and skills just keep leveling up nonstop. He doesn't stop there. He sharply swings his new tail blade, delivering a huge spinning strike that it hits the last lizard and finishes it off, and it lets out a final weak groan. The boy dashed forward, fiercely swinging the heavy lizard tail with incredible force. He followed through with the strike. The monster was completely torn apart, scales flying everywhere. Covered in the monster's blood but on the rise, the boy shouts that he is thrilled with the victory. But as soon as the adrenaline subsides, he thinks, maybe it's time to call it a day. Glancing around the hall, he says in surprise that there turned out to be much more material than he expected. When he reached the huge city walls, evening had already fallen. Walking through the lively streets, he blends in with the crowd among other adventurers and locals. Passing by the city fountain, he heads to exchange his loot. He hums to himself after exchanging everything for money, thinking he will treat himself to a good piece of meat for dinner, since he now has money. And then he thinks it wise to buy everything that might be needed later. Essence froze for a moment and realized that before doing anything else, he really needed to find pants. He looks at the damage and cannot believe that his new tail move really tore his clothes. He was so focused on the fight that he didn't even notice the tear. And now he is walking around with a huge hole right in the back of his gear, and he feels quite ridiculous because of it. He rushes through the noisy city streets, repeating to himself that there is no time he urgently needs to get to the clothing store. Fleeing, he nervously imagines that he might run into someone he actually knows. Just as he was starting to worry, heels clicked on the floor and a voice called his name. Essence froze in place, looking completely stunned and hoping he misheard, but he recognizes that voice anywhere and wonders why she is even here when Polaris comes out and says his name again. He looks over his shoulder, all sweaty, and Polaris just pierces him with a look and says greetings. She smiled slightly and recalled seeing in the news his adventure rank finally rose. Essen looks incredibly tense, sweating as he realizes how big a mess his situation is right now. Polaris admits that she actually doesn't know the whole story of what is happening to him, but she tells him that it is clear all the hard work he puts in is finally starting to pay off. If Polaris is a player of such a high rank, then there really is no reason for her to be wandering the lower districts. Essen admits that he already thought she had completely forgotten him and asks if she really still cares. She looks at him and says his name while he stands with his back turned. He looks at the ground and feels completely miserable for ending up here. Polaris has a hopeful look, and she asks if he will finally be able to go out and fight again. She begins to suggest that they form a team together, but Essen immediately interrupts her and says he can't. He stands his ground and tells her that it simply won't happen, while Polaris remains standing in complete shock. Essen clenches his fist and admits, if he really had joined forces with Polaris, his rank would have risen much faster. But he opens his palm and tells her directly that this is not the kind of adventurer he wants to be at all. He says that it's probably just his petty pride, but he stubbornly decided to crawl to the top on his own. Polaris just looks at him and says, "You're still the same selfish person, you haven't changed at all." She stands in the middle of the street, closes her eyes for a second, and just absorbs everything like. While people pass by them, she finally whispers to him that she understands where he comes from. Her expression softens, she looks at him and says she will wait until he gets there. She gives him a wide, radiant smile and repeats that she will definitely wait. Essence begins to walk away, just waves over his shoulder without looking back, which leaves him and he disappears back into the crowd to continue doing things his own way. The boy raises his fist and exclaims that he has finally ignited time to prepare everything for tomorrow. He bumps into someone right on the street, and while that man only says, "Oh," the boy instantly apologizes. The boy hurriedly runs away, meanwhile the one he hit just stands with a strange smile. The man in armor simply says that he sees what is happening, watching as the boy walks away, clutching his arm and casting a suspicious glance. The scene changes. The sun is already setting and someone loudly calls out to attract the shopkeeper's attention. It turns out that the boy is near the clothing stall, politely asking the seller to give him new pants. Then the plot shifts to the Thunderhorn peaks, a high-level aerial dungeon where lightning constantly strikes the rocks. In the middle of the battle, a huge monster roars, and at that very moment someone rushes toward it with a loud battle cry. Polaris rushes at full speed, putting all his strength into the charge and preparing to knock down the beast. She focused, looking sternly, and activated the ice floor magic. The entire ground beneath her feet became a weapon. The giant beast was struck by a flash of pure cold. It let out a surprised cry as the blow threw it back. Polaris doesn't give it a second to breathe, shouts an ice spear spell, and launches it into flight. An ice spike pierced the monster's chest, and Polaris watched with a satisfied smile as it fell. But this is not the end yet. She notices a lightning-fast worm approaching and instantly jumps into the air to get ahead of it. The worm tries to strike, but she is too fast. She slices the creature with a splash of icy energy before it can touch her. She held her breath for a moment, realizing she had already gotten rid of more than 20 of these while the storm rages. Fight after fight, but she knows, during the flood period, the dungeons are exactly like this. She focuses, calls upon the power of the frozen star to awaken her magic of eternal ice and put an end to the threat forever. Later, the locals come to thank her for calming the monsters as she does every year, and she just smiles and says it's no big deal. Leaving the area, she sincerely hopes that at least a little of everything remains quiet and peaceful. Polaris just smiles and says she is not interested in monster biology at all. Her only plan is to constantly eliminate them one by one as soon as they appear. She leaves behind a quiet, snowy village and continues on her way. Meanwhile, the boy thinks about Essen and can't sit still, even though he said he would wait. He approaches the stroller and asks to be driven to Libel, and the driver immediately understands that he is dealing with an adventurer. A whole week has already passed since he crossed paths with Polaris. The driver shouts, "Faster, get in," and the boy thinks about how training in the swamps finally prepared him to move on. He jumps inside and discovers that he is not the only one who set out on this trip. Behind, some boy is already standing and looking at him with a sharp, cat-like gaze. The stranger just smirks, mocking him. After all, he is the one stuck at the very bottom of the ranking. The boy sits and cannot understand why this stranger behaves so rudely when they have just met. And he just smiles mockingly, acts as if he is the master here, and the boy looks at this completely stunned. The stranger addressed me, introduced himself as Kit, and the boy sharply cut in, saying he didn't even ask his name. The boy proudly makes it clear that he is no longer at the very bottom of the ranking, and Kit just snorted and said he doesn't care. Looking at him, the boy begins to wonder if his rank is really as high as he presents himself. Especially his equipment is worn and battered, as if it has gone through years of hard trials, and it is clear that he has seen many battles. He had to admit that guy had some kind of charm, and it was exactly then. Even Keith starts saying that rank E adventurers are actually tough, and asks the guy if he is even on the same level. He coldly throws, "Don't put me in the same row with some eternal losers, there's no place for the weak here, go home." But the guy gets serious and tells Keith to stop calling him by that name. Essen stands right in front of the guy and looking him in the eyes insists, "My name is Essen, stop using that other nickname." Keith just closes his eyes and smirks, as if he feels sorry that Essen dismissed his kindness like that. But lets it go and still calls him Pessin, throwing a challenge, "Prove that you are really worthy to reach the top." Essen disagrees, says he will get there himself, even if he wasn't ordered to, and he doesn't have to prove anything to Keith. The shot shifts to a stone wall looking at the horizon, and the long journey finally comes to an end. The driver comes out and informs them that they have finally arrived. Essen jumps out, raises his hands up, and exclaims how such a long journey exhausts you. Keith tells him that he is acting like a real spoiled brat, and Essen just replies that he can't help it, he has never really traveled. Suddenly something catches his attention and he lets out a scream. Essen just froze. Peering through the wall, he finally sees the sea and the port town spread out before him. The cat again calls Essen by that irritating nickname. And Essen sharply cuts in, "Your name is Essens," and asks what he really wants. Keith smiles crookedly and warns him not to take his name so lightly, otherwise he will blow him away. Then asks if he is heading to the dungeon. Essen says that for now he only plans to inspect the place, then turns the question back to him. Keith just laughed and says he has much more time than Essen, so he doesn't even start until tomorrow. Essen walks away and thinks about how he even managed to come across such a real weirdo. The path leads straight to the very edge of the water, where the waves crash loudly against the rocks. Finally, he reached the entrance to the rank E dungeon, to the huge place called the Whisper Reef. Essen stands, absorbing everything around, and suddenly realizes he really made it to the reef where the waves roar. He remembered how Alulu whispered to him about a secret place where no one else goes, so he set off there. Essen feels quite good in this place, imagining how he can learn everything he wants here while tightening the straps of his gear, he thinks, why not earn some money by taking a couple of monster hunting orders? It turns out that the dungeon where no one goes always eventually gets overwhelmed with requests to clear it because if monsters keep appearing and the place becomes too cramped, the barrier won't hold and they will rush at people. Lulu advised him this job, saying that although the place is quiet, they pay quite well here. The goal for today is simple. He just needs to track down and finish 3 of those leaf crabs and… Suddenly, he notices one of the monsters dangling in the water very close by. When he looks at it, he recalls childhood stories about a horde of monsters that almost destroyed the village, and honestly forget about money and rank. He just wants something like that to never happen again. He realized that sometimes he would have to take on such tasks to keep everything safe. The leaf crab was just sitting in the water when suddenly it felt him. The boy strikes with all his might, but his weapon barely leaves a dent, and he can't believe how tough this shell is. He must retreat and take a stance in the water again, because the monster immediately swung a huge claw that almost tore off his head. He is in complete shock from that power, shouting that an E-rank monster should not have such strength. The crab does not retreat, its giant pincers snap, trying to crush him. The boy only smiles crookedly and asks if the monster really told him to bring this. He is used to being underestimated. He immediately rushes back into the thick of the action, shouting that he has had to endure condescending looks all his life. He remembers that such monsters have a soft, vulnerable spot on their belly, and they cannot move quickly back and forth there, so he uses that gap, runs around the side, and delivers a powerful blow that flips the crab inside out. The boy says that once the monster is flipped over, it is almost defenseless. He grabs the huge leg of the creature and starts preparing it to check if it can be eaten at all. He forcefully breaks through the shell, grumbling that even near the base of the leg it is incredibly hard, but eventually he manages to get through. The meat inside steams hot, and as soon as he bites it, he is simply blown away. It is so delicious that he cannot help but smile, completely immersed in the taste of the dish. He thinks about how the texture is perfect, and how the sweet and salty flavors of the sea combine so wonderfully. He imagined himself becoming a chef and conquering the entire culinary world. He even imagines Polaris helping him run a restaurant where they serve everyone stinky dragon stew. But he quickly came to his senses and started yelling at himself for being such a fool. He suddenly remembered his true goal and shouting, said that his dream was not to win some restaurant rating. The boy makes his way along the rocky shore and thinks, if he continues to be so shaky, he will never catch up with Polaris. So he decides to head to the city to find a decent place to spend the night. Walking past the shops, he reminds himself he needs to find the cheapest place possible, and that is. Right then he freezes in front of a place called Coral Pavilion. The smell of soup from there pulled so strongly that he could not pass by, so he pushes the door and entering throws out a brief hello. The man behind the counter greets him warmly and asks if he is a traveler looking for a room. So the boy says he will stay for about 5 days and the man tells him to stay as long as he needs while someone nearby shouts, "You are incredible." A mysterious man emerged from the shadows and loudly boasted that he was the strongest adventurer around. He says he came to this dungeon with one specific goal, but in reality, it is just a short detour for him. The cat points to the scars on his face and boasts to the boy that they are proof of his strength. He is the cat of the burning sun, and the boy goes crazy over how cool that nickname sounds. The cat notices the boy standing there and calls him his lackey, saying he finally arrived late, and the boy looks completely exhausted and irritated. But the boy is simply thrilled at the very thought of having a lackey. The boy looks at the table and asks Kate what he is even doing, and Kate pretends it is obvious he is just having dinner. The boy sharply says that he is actually asking why the cat is stuffing the child's head with a bunch of lies. But the cat snorted, if the boy occupies a rank lower than his own 70,000, then they are basically the same. The boy asks the lackey about his rank. He mumbles that it is around 76,000 and then shyly admits that he doesn't even have a cool nickname. The cat looks him in the eyes and asks if he has finally given up his title of Eternal Last, which makes the boy feel like he is about to explode. So Kit grumbled that he should first put him ahead in the ranking, and only then dare to contradict him, and out of helplessness, the boy just burst into tears. The boy clung to the shirt and muttered curses under his breath, feeling a burning pain because lately he had been training hard to become stronger. Kit smirked and told the boy that his recent promotion in rank was just luck. He said he only knew that version of him, which, hiding failure, laughs like an idiot, and then Kit turned around and repeated for a long time how much he hated the true nature of this boy. Before he patted him on the shoulder and said that for a boy with no achievements, looking at things that way was quite fair. Keith just turns his back and leaves the restaurant, leaving the boy standing there completely exhausted while the boy Nick watched all this with an anxious expression on his face. Later that night, the boy lies on his back in bed and just stares at the ceiling. He clenched his teeth and scolded himself. He couldn't even find words to respond to Kit's insults. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. The boy sat up and said, "Come in." The door suddenly opened, and at the threshold stood the boy from the restaurant, looking at that boy and asking, "Who are you?" He smiles and says, "I am Nick," adds that his dad runs this place, and then asks the boy what his name is. The boy sits on the edge of the bed and finally says to the child, "My name is Essen." I haven't even asked Nick if his dad wants to know about breakfast for tomorrow when I notice the mop in his hands and smile, saying it's good that he is helping. Nick says that probably yes, and then explains that he is saving all his money for a sword because he plans to conquer the dungeon. Essen warmly smiles at the boy and says that sounds like a really great goal, and in his soul he can't shake the thought, wasn't he once the same? Nick starts swinging the mop like a weapon and shouts that he will surpass Essen's friends and all the other adventurers. Essen just laughs and says he sees how it is, so he definitely can't afford to lose to a child. Nick didn't calm down. He shouted that he wouldn't lose to a lower-ranked boy without a title, and finally hit Essen with the mop. Essen clenches his fist, thinking about what kind of world they live in. Results are the only thing that really matters to people. When you realize that people can only be measured by numbers, and that only strength gives them value. Essen doesn't take his eyes off the goal, thinking that they all simply strive for the top. He knew for sure, someday he would definitely surpass people like Kit and even overtake Polaris. Morning envelops the harbor, and the seagull just sits there watching the sun rise while. Returning to the shop, Kit finished breakfast and smiled, thanking the owner for the food, this catches Essen's attention. He finishes 2 waves and thanks the old man before setting off. He catches up with Kit on the street and loudly calls his name to get his attention. Kit mistakenly called him Pessin. Essen corrected him and asked to go with him to the dungeon, and Kit just shrugged and said he could do whatever he wanted. Essen catches up with him with a broad smile and sincerely thanks him for what happened yesterday. He says that although things have been going well lately, he still feels he has a lot to learn, so it's better to keep working hard than to be spoiled. Kit just throws him a smug look, as if to say that it's quite natural for the strong to give advice to the weak. Essen disagrees, throws in Kit's face that the advice was just rudeness, but as soon as they moved on, they came across a group of guys pulling a huge cart. Keith looks at the load and asks if they really caught those creatures alive, wondering if some hypnosis was used. Essen admits he has never heard of monsters being taken out of the dungeon alive. Keith explains that some monsters are used as ingredients and fresh ones fetch much higher prices. And although it sounds rather grim, Essen just shrugged, saying it's part of the job. Kit does not take his eyes off the cart. He clearly has strange feelings about this whole affair. Step by step they reach the edge of the cliffs, from where a view of the water opens before them. Essen decides to set off alone. He says that they are both solo adventurers, so it makes sense to part ways. Keith keeps reminding him that cooperating with a weakling like him is completely useless, and Essen, irritated, says not to repeat that every 5 seconds. He tells Kit, just let me know if you run into any problems, but Kit only barely grunted and went on. Waves crash against the rocks below, and they finally go their separate ways. The giant flower creature lets out a deafening scream when caught by a massive attack. Essen does not hold back. Shouting at the top of his lungs, he puts all his strength into the final blow. He leaps high into the air, shouting his great move, sure. And the power rises to another level. He crashes down with such force that he completely shatters the monster and the ground around it. Essen froze for a moment, placing the huge blade on his shoulder, and looked quite satisfied with how everything went. He looked at the monster, sure it was a leaf star, and wondered what abilities it had. But suddenly a loud scream cut through the air. Ere Essen realizes the voice sounded exactly like Keith's, and he starts running toward the noise. He can't believe his friend is in trouble. He shouted, calling Keith, where are you okay? But froze when he finally noticed a figure in the distance. It's Keith, but something is wrong. Essen is completely depressed and asks in horror what happened to his hand. He stared at Keith's hand as if asking whether the monster could really have caused such damage, but Keith just looked back and asked if he was the one who did it. Keith just snorts at the idea, says that it is definitely not so, and keeps his eyes lowered. Keith pointed back at the charred patch of land and indifferently said that his opponent is now just a pile of ashes. Essen stands stunned and thinks that even his own gift would not be enough to pull off something so crazy. He still does not take his eyes off the destruction, wondering what kind of power could have turned the monster to dust, while Keith grabs the potion. Without wasting time, Keith bites off the cork from the bottle, preparing to treat his wounds. The liquid hits the hand and immediately gets to work. It explodes with a bright flash as the healing process begins. Under the scorching sun, Essen shouts the name of the gift, and Keith shows his smoking hand and explains that his power is in creating flames. Keith throws him a smug look and asks if he is not jealous, saying that he has the perfect gift for the one destined to be on top. Essen understood that elemental powers are extremely rare and useful, so it is quite clear why Keith boasts so much. But he can't stand it and asks if Kit really gets burned like that every time in battle, and Kit just says that it's part of the deal. Essen grimly noted that the bill for all that burn ointment must be insanely high, but he knew waiting for it to heal on its own would just slow him down too much. Keith stoically looks into the distance. A drop of sweat drips down his face, and he says that enduring all this pain is the fate of the strong. Essen looks at him completely puzzled and asks why he even remains an adventurer if the downsides are clearly too great. Big Kit's eyes lit up with a sharp look, and he says that he has repeated this many times already but has no intention of changing his mind. They stood together on the edge of a high path above the cliff. Keith looked at the horizon and said he would become the strongest. He clenches his fist, bandages are visible, tension written on his face, and he shouts that he must become the best no matter what. The two of them set off along the long winding road, like tiny dots against the backdrop of a vast landscape. Essen looks at him from behind and can't get rid of the thought. Is it worth sacrificing parts of one's own body for strength if everyone has a limit? He looks at the people running in the distance and once again questions how exactly Kit's mindset can make him the strongest. But his head suddenly turns. Someone nearby is shouting that the city is completely destroyed. Two guys rushed past Essen in complete panic, one shouting that the church must be warned immediately about the journey in Bozy. Keith and Essen are walking along the path when suddenly Keith stops and asks, what is happening here? From afar someone shouted that they have been found, and Essen looks completely bewildered while Nick shouts, calling his older brothers. Nick rushes to them, all panicked and out of breath. Essen shouts his name. Keith asks him what happened, while the boy, bent over, barely utters words that something is wrong at the port market. He is more scared than ever and shouts that this is a disaster. Monsters are attacking right here, right now, which leaves. Essen is completely stunned by this news, and Keith's face suddenly darkened and became very serious. Without saying a word, Keith takes off like a rocket towards the city, and Essen barely manages to shout his name before he disappears. Nick urges Essen hurry up and follow us, but she still just stands there trying to catch up F. I feel like this whole situation is just getting out of control, and I don't understand what the hell is really going on here. Ahead complete chaos. Smoke and ruins everywhere, people running for shelter, and Essen just stands there looking completely shocked. The city has turned into total ruin. People are scattering everywhere, running for their lives and grabbing whatever they can, and the boy stands in the middle of this chaos trying to comprehend why all this is happening. Nick explains that some people organized an auction of live monsters, but suddenly, they all started going crazy at the same time, and the boy is just stunned. How could anyone even put such monsters up for sale? Recalling this morning when everything seemed normal, I saw a huge burst of energy suddenly shoot into the sky. The boy notices a huge pillar of fire in the distance and realizes Keith is already in the thick of it. So Nick shouts loudly at him, "Hurry, get to the port before everything gets even worse." He shouted back that he was already on it, and they both dashed in a race past frightened crowds. When the boy remembers that he had seen at least 10 of these on a truck earlier, Nick asks if they really all went crazy at the same moment, and the boy just yelled, "Keith, be careful and don't do anything stupid." But suddenly someone lets out a deafening roar, and a huge vortex of energy begins tearing everything around apart. The huge beast was simply blown to pieces by a powerful spinning attack. Fragments flew everywhere as if it were nothing. Keith looks completely focused and keeps fighting, not even noticing how the monster's eye below watches his every move. He counts 2, then 3 more, and suddenly realizes he has already finished off 4 of them, standing amid smoke and debris. Then it dawns on him that supplies have run out. He starts sweating, remembering that he used the last bottle of burn medicine while clearing the dungeon. Keith looks around at the swarm of crab-like monsters and thinks about how he tried to lure as many of them as possible to himself along the way. He fervently hoped that they would be enough, although it was quite likely that some had already scattered to different corners of the city. His hand already looked terrible from all this pressure, and he felt that his body was about to give out if he didn't finish quickly, but he does not retreat. He leans back, preparing a huge strike and gathering all his remaining strength into one final burst. Keith unleashes everything at full power. The move, Volcanic Strike. His fist flew straight into the monster's face with such force that it could have leveled everything around. The monster emitted a disgusting screech upon the hit, but only looked back fiercely. It was clear from its eyes that it could still fight. Nearby, a girl screams. Everything becomes even more dangerous, and the person hiding in the ruins just watches in complete horror. Keith tells himself that he is strong enough for this, looks the monster straight in the eyes, and shouts at the top of his lungs that this is the end for them. He has a wild look, and he shouts that he will not let them tear the city to pieces. Just at that moment, the boy and Nick run in and see Keith standing there with a hand that looked completely mangled. The boy, having just seen Keith in such a state, instantly shouted his name. Keith just glances and calls him a bumpkin, pretending as if it doesn't even hurt him. Keith tries to act tough, but the boy immediately shows how mangled his hand is. Keith just shrugged and said it's okay as long as the right hand works. But the guy wasn't fooled and asks if he still has medicine to patch himself up. Upwards, Keith admits that he has no supplies left at all. He stands amid the rubble with a grim, serious expression. He says it doesn't matter right now, only he can really do it. He understands that if Nick came all the way here to look for them, there is no one else left to fight. He knows he can't handle everyone at once, but still prepares to throw himself into battle again. Keith shouts that he will deal with each of them himself. When a huge explosion tears the area apart, stones fly in all directions. The guy grabbed Keith and shouted for him to stop. His body is about to give out, but Keith sharply cut him off, telling him not to interfere in his affairs. Not intending to retreat, the guy says he is going into battle and asks Keith just to watch to make sure the flames don't get out of control. Keith passionately says he doesn't want any help and it's better if he leaves the city before he gets killed, and the guy only asks if they really have time to keep arguing. A sudden burst of energy, the guy shouted that he is tired of these talks. He lowers his gaze, his face serious, says the name Yumi and asks if they have really come this far. The guy roots his feet into the ground and stands firm while a wild force bursts around him. Kit is in complete shock from what he has seen, calls the boy a bastard, while Nick and the girl stand aside looking completely frightened. Keith looks at the boy's new appearance in surprise and asks if he is really some kind of monster pretending to be human, but the boy firmly says that he misunderstood everything. The boy extends his hand, which begins to glow with a strange light, explaining that he did not want to show this because he knew how it would end, but this power is his true gift. Keith looks at the glowing hand and realizes that with such an ability one can survey the entire city in an instant, but he knows the boy wants to do this part himself. Although he knows the plan, Kit shouts that he still does not want to just leave him behind. He looks the boy in the eyes and says, "This place is yours until the city becomes safe, but if you can't endure it, I will take up the fight again." Kit begins to leave and somewhere in the distance someone shouts after him, "You are a vile bastard," for what he is doing. He turned to Nick and asked if he could take the girl and go to the place where the adults had gathered. Nick looks up at him, and Kit only softly says that everything is fine and promises. One day Nick will become an even better traveler than any of us. Nick agreed and told the girl that they needed to go, while Kit shouted for them to move and watch their safety. The boy looks after them and says to Kit, "Don't die there, I place my faith in you, you are the strongest." Kit asks to wait a second and adds that for now he will have to be selfish. The boy shouts that they are both in this together, and then he begins. He pushed himself to the limit as the monster's armor began to creak under the pressure. He dashed upward, jumping high above the rooftops to cross the city as quickly as possible. Swiftly descending, he lands right in the middle of a narrow street, and right there, he finds a girl pressed against the wall in a corner, completely out of breath and trembling while the monster watches. Hovering over her, saying she did it herself, and she just cries. The boy lunged like lightning and struck the creature with a heavy blow, which pushed it back just enough for him to check if the girl was okay. She barely utters what she is, but tries to warn him that the fight is not over yet. He looks around and realizes with horror, he has not finished it off yet, and the monster is just beginning. Isona is struck by a powerful blow of giant claws, and a piercing scream erupts as she forcefully puts the forest monsters into a deep sleep, preventing them from attacking, and the blonde next to her looks completely stunned, and Essen just stands and watches. A bit embarrassed, but the girl just laughs and says that Essen's gift is a whole different level. She says that with such power, even complete beginners will be able to safely tame monsters, so her power is still quite weak, so having an S in the round that helps is real luck. But suddenly her tone changes completely, and she asks why they just don't break up this party. She tells Essen that she actually doesn't fight at all, she just falls asleep in the middle of everything, and since now she is D rank, she thinks it's much faster to just kill monsters directly and looks at. She looked at Essen with complete disgust, saying that it annoys her that Essen just reaps all the benefits. The guys in front step back, and one of them asks if her power really just lulls monsters to sleep. He says it would be cool if it worked on higher rank enemies, but she has no combat experience at all, so selling this idea is hard. Suddenly, a suspicious man with a huge nose appeared and boldly offered Essence to team up with him. He says he has a plan to make a lot of money and heard that her gift is quite unique, that this incredibly captivates Essen. He tells her that only she can handle this matter, and she asks with disbelief if he is really serious. The shot suddenly shifts to a brutal attack. Blood splatters everywhere, Essence screams as the boy is hit. He bent over and half it is clear that after that move he is in a lot of pain. Essen simply breaks down, sobs aloud and repeats how sorry she is about what happened. And the boy just wipes some blood from his face and tells her that it was very close. Essen asks if he is okay and he brushes it off. It's nothing. He says everything is fine because the injury is not that serious. She just stands and looks at him with tears in her eyes, and he, looking at her, seems to truly see who she is for the first time. The boy begins to pack his things together and asks if she is the same one he passed this morning. Suddenly he realizes that she was part of the group that released that monster outside, and it overwhelms Essen. He completely breaks down. She began to cry and apologized, saying that if her gift were stronger, this would not have happened at all. The boy asks for clarification, wondering if she really used her gift to overthrow that monster. And then the monster's eyes suddenly opened wide. It wakes up and becomes aggressive again. Essen is still panicking and apologizing, but the boy tells her to stop saying sorry and focus because things are getting worse, so he begs her, "Can you use your ability on them one more time?" The monster swoops in, and someone shouts that their friend is in great trouble. Essen stands frightened and quietly says she can't do it, and the boy is simply stunned. She explains that as soon as they wake up, they develop resistance to her power. The boy shouts back, asking how she then sold them alive, and she just cries and apologizes again. Essen cries. She remembers that deep down she knew it was dangerous, but she was so happy that her gift was finally needed, she acted without thinking, and the boy begins to piece things together in his head, remembers those two, and wonders if Essen was brought only to use her power. But he abruptly cuts off that thought because he has much more serious problems ahead. He tells himself, first, he needs to deal with this current disaster and but his main goal is to get everyone to a safe place and find out where Kit went. But suddenly a giant claw breaks through the building next to them, completely catching them both off guard. The boy can barely utter a word looking at this devastation. He is completely stunned by the size of the monster that just appeared. He raises his eyes to this huge beast and recognize it as a leaf snake. It is enormous, and the boy realizes that now everything has become much worse because they say this creature is the most gluttonous among all monsters. It will eat practically everything in a row. When the boy finally understands why the city is so smashed, it becomes clear an ordinary leaf crab could not have caused such damage on its own. Essen is completely confused, crying and explaining that she thought the monster would be tasty with sauce. She really believed she would make a lot of money from it. And B. The boy says yes, this would be enough for hundreds, but she could never cook something of that size. He shouts that the mountain is awakening then. And Essen keeps apologizing, again and again, calling herself a reckless fool for dragging them into this mess. But she has no time to regret because the monster suddenly lunged forward, breaking through the debris and letting out a loud roar. They both scream, barely managing to jump out of the way of the giant creature. And the beast appears right in front of them, bearing its huge fangs through the smoke. The boy grits his teeth and realizes how bad things really are. He knows if he tries to carry Essen, his legs won't make it to the roof, so he decides to stay and hold the line here. He turns to Essen and sharply calls her name to make her focus. She looks back at him, completely stunned as she ha. She barely utters a reply, stammering and anxiously waits for what he will say what she needs to do. The boy firmly holds Essen, and the monster right behind them snaps its jaws. He tells her that he will handle the beast himself and that she needs to run while there is still a chance, but S hesitates, and the boy immediately cuts her off sharply, saying that just running won't be enough, and looks at her puzzled when she starts explaining about F. She tells him about her special gift called hypnosis, which allows her to instantly put anyone she targets to sleep. But there is a catch. When she uses it, all the hatred of the target instantly turns directly onto her. She recalls the market in the harbor their Kit, a fiery adventurer, held back the crowd for their sake. They managed to escape, but the monsters that broke free still chased them so. The boy suddenly realizes she is talking about Kit. Essen explains that now that they are separated, the monster's hatred should no longer be on her. But the effect of the ability might still remain. The boy asks if this means that only those monsters Kit fights will remain. And once they are defeated, the leafy serpent Essen confirms he is right, which leads to. The boy says that the enemy will in any case put her above him. Essen looks worried but agrees to the plan so. The boy tells her, just run exactly as you are now. She is completely stunned by this advice and suddenly. And she doesn't even have time to comprehend it. The boy jumps onto the roof and she rushes through the streets. Essen completely loses her mind. She cries uncontrollably, clenches her fist and begs the boy not to leave her behind. She is terrified that he really is going to abandon her, but he shouted back that he would never do that. And then suddenly he yelled for her to duck like. Something fast rushed right over her. She ducked and screamed in full panic just as. The boy makes his move, shouts a special attack, Sharp Claws of the Forest Cat, and strikes with all his might. And a huge blow hits the ground right behind Essen. And she doesn't even stop for a second. The monster's huge maw hung open when it completely exploded. A giant burst of dark energy or blood erupted everywhere, and the entity collapsed on the ground, the entire area S. She is covered in dark spots from the explosion, sitting in the middle of this mess, trembling and trying to understand what happened. And then she raises her eyes all covered in dark liquid, barely pronounces words, stammering, and asks if he really just saved her life. But when she looks for him, she sees. He settled on the very top of a tall lamppost and just sits there as if nothing happened. He realizes the plan really worked, but looks a bit disappointed and mutters to himself, what a pity he couldn't snag that skill he had his eye on. The boy jumps down from the pole and tells S that he's sorry and apologizes for using her as bait. She barely manages to say a word when he says he must quickly move on because everything is starting to get out of control, and he feels that the Church of the God of Journeys will soon intervene, so he asks her not to talk to anyone about his secret gift. He dashed down the alley, shouting back that he counts on her to keep silent. Essence remains on the ground just watching him go in complete shock. She is covered in the monster's dark dirt, trying to make sense of everything while giant stones and debris were falling from everywhere. The whole area was trembling from the aftershocks of the battle, and then finally, the boy finds the very last monster. It barely manages to react when he tells it that its time is up, standing there like it's. His energy begins to rage wildly. He looks like a completely different person. All that power swirls around his body and the monster lets out one last desperate scream. The boy simply shouts and rushes forward with a powerful strike that causes. A huge explosion tears through the street. He lets out a loud scream as the light dissipates, leaving nothing else, only a crater where the monster once was. He freezes for a moment amid the ruins, then raises his eyes and sees someone moving across the rooftops. The boy realizes the fight is finally over and loudly calls out to Keith, shouting that they really managed to take down all the monsters in this area. But although he is completely exhausted, he says that a hot fire still burns inside him. He pushes himself beyond the possible until his body finally can't take it. He crashes into the dark water with a loud splash and sinks into that muddy sludge. He barely gets up, looks around, and frantically calls out if Keith is even alive. He repeats that they won, clutching at any sign while both just fell into the mud, completely wiped out after everything that happened. The boy crawls closer and leans over Keith, his voice softening as he says his friend's name. It looks like he's about to break down any moment until finally Kit opens his eyes and tells the boy that he is shouting too loudly. In a barely audible voice, he asks to stop all this noise. Kit looks at the sky with a tired smile and stubbornly insists that he is the strongest of all. The The boy just laughs a little and tells Kit that he is really something incredible to say that right now they are both just lying in the middle of the ruins. And Kit asks if the boy's return means that the city is finally safe, and the boy replies, yes, just to be sure it's finally over. The boy says that earlier he was delayed, had to fend off a leaf crab and a leaf snake. It took quite some time and now he looks at this huge monster and is not sure if they really won. It looks like it has not a single scratch, which this made him realize that he should have predicted this. He tells the others that he wishes they had warned him if they knew how tough this thing turned out to be. And suddenly he realizes that his firewall was nowhere near enough to stop it. He stands silently for a second then. Ben decides not to take risks, says he will return and walk the streets again, just to be safe. But first he suddenly grabs Keith and starts dragging him away, saying he will take him to a clinic or somewhere where they can help him. But Kit starts going crazy, calls the boy a bastard, and shouts for him to let go, says he can walk himself. That when he is carried the burns hurt even more and still insists that he is the strongest here. The boy simply tells him, if you are really that strong you have to endure. He just brushes off the complaints like. The rest of the day they rushed through the city streets. They even had to stop by the guild branch for a brief questioning, and also, when they finally returned to the inn, the boy was completely exhausted. He said he just collapsed on the bed and immediately fell asleep. The next morning he goes out, sure that the clinic should be right on the way from the hotel. He is just walking when some girl in a white cloak notices him and freezes in place. She is really glad to see him, even asks if he is the boy named Essen who perhaps. This confuses him a bit. He tells her she is right, although he has no idea who she is or what she wants. She was so happy to have named him correctly, introduced herself as Felsi and struck a pose and it. Explaining that she is a priestess from the Church of the Journey in God. She asks if he has a minute to talk about the mess that happened yesterday. The boy stands and listens, and she introduces herself again so he definitely knows she is from the church. They stood in the middle of the path, and she asked once more if he was free to talk about that incident. He looks a bit tired but tells her it's okay and that he can talk a little, although deep down he knew the church would intervene as soon as everything exploded as it did, and he was just waiting for them to show up. Felsi sighs with relief and says, thank God, acknowledging that Essen is probably exhausted from everything that has happened recently, but adds that they both must give all their strength. She moves forward and tells him to follow her, and Essen walks behind thinking that the people from the church are actually a much bigger hassle than the monsters. It turns out that the Church of the God of Travels is just a large group of people who dedicate their lives to serving this god. They also take care of adventurers with special gifts, and their work is actually divided into two completely different tasks. First of all, they generously give blessings to everyone who decides to join their faith. As soon as a child turns 12 or someone decides to accept the faith, they hurry to the church to receive the blessing called the gift. The second part of their work is much more serious. They punish all followers who break their rules. While ordinary authorities punish everyday crimes, everything that violates church law is entirely in the hands of the priests. So if an adventurer messes up and a monster destroys a town because of him, it is the priests who come to clean up this mess. And the situation they are currently dealing with is exactly such a problem. As they walk, Essen begins to worry greatly. The church is simply obsessed with its strict rules. He knows, in their eyes, the gift exists for only one purpose: to kill monsters and nothing more. Looking around, he thinks about what the Church of the Journey in God considers most important: never forgive monsters, even for the fact that they exist at all. He feels even worse because he knows that his body occasionally turns into a monster. If the truth ever came out, he would definitely be hunted. Felsi pulls him out of his thoughts, cheerfully asks him to follow her inside, so he just goes. They enter the room. She tells him to wait a second, and he stands there, clueless about what she has planned. Essen sits down, tries to be serious, and says that he wants to talk about the details of the case. But Felsi decisively interrupts him and says that she already knows everything because she went ahead and read all the records of the case herself. Before he could respond, a huge pile of food slammed onto the table with a thud: sausages, eggs, and oysters. Essen just sits there, completely stunned and totally bewildered by the gigantic pile of food she brought out. Essen looks completely shocked when he is called the hero who saved the entire town, and Felsi just pretends that nothing is wrong, says that she wanted to see him so much that she came early in the morning without even having breakfast. Essen looks at her distrustfully and asks, "Are you seriously going to eat all this food right here?" She starts greedily stuffing herself and clearly signals that she is not sharing with anyone, and Essen just says that he doesn't even need any. He tries to clarify everything. The real hero is Kit, and he just helped a little F. Felsi thinks he is just being modest, but insists it's true and asks her not to drag out the conversation because he needs to go visit Kit. She explains that the monster hunt was such chaos that the official records probably missed a lot of details. But she did not miss the chance to say that in her story, he and his friend still received a lot of credit from her. When he heard this, it was as if a huge stone fell from his shoulders. He says he feels great relief that this story is now known exactly like that. Felsi is preparing to rush in with questions, and Essen sits and puzzles over where he should even start. Essen looks a bit tense and tells her that everything is exactly as written in the report. Felsi smiles and agrees, but says that it is still important for her to hear the whole story from him personally. Essen looks awkward when he admits that he actually was not there to see how the monsters started their frenzied attack. He explains that he learned about the attack only when he was returning from the dungeon and just collapsed. And Felsi continues eating her dish, nodding she understands that he was not even in the city when the incident began. A sharp gleam appears in her eyes, and she says that despite this, it seems he already knew what the culprit looked like. Essen glanced into memories in passing, and says that he recognized only that one specific person, but he only passed by her near the entrance to the dungeon, so he admits he actually does not know her name or any details. He asks if they have already managed to find the culprit, but Felsi only throws a joking glance and says that it is a secret. She finally spoke out. The hypnotist is kept in the back room and Essen just sits, stunned, digesting the news. Felsi twirls food on her fork and notes how strange it is that the criminal simply surrenders. Essen looks very nervous and asks her what will happen to that girl now. A grim expression appeared on Felsi's face, and she told him directly that it will be a death sentence. She casually swallows a sip of the drink and adds that they do this only after taking away a person's gift. This is what scares in the church, because everything depends on what the priest decides here and now. Felsi adds, although they all deserve death, this girl is definitely the most guilty among them. She explains that hypnotizing monsters is one thing, but losing control and putting the whole city at risk is much worse, and Essen is a little worried and says that he thought all this was already in the report. He shook his head and said that the girl's gift had a sinister flaw. It drew monsters in the opposite direction from the evacuation. And although she messed up, he insists that she is the only reason why the damage to the city was not much greater. A creepy gleam appeared in Felsi's eyes, and she asked if her rank would rise if she killed the monster she brought. The question leaves Essen completely speechless, and they just sit there in oppressive silence while his tea cools. After a short pause, she lightens the mood and says that she basically understood what happened. Essen only pretends to be calm and tells her that he is just glad he was really able to help. Felsi looks at him and says she is sincerely glad that both he and Kit are nearby to protect the city. Then she bows deeply and on behalf of the entire church, solemnly thanks him for what he has done. Essen noticeably blushes because of all this and simply gives a short, nervous reply. He decides that it is time to go, says he is leaving now, but just as he steps out, Felsi drops a rumor supposedly people saw a monster that resembled a human or a human that looked like a monster. She fixed him with her gaze and asks if by any chance he knows something about it. Felsi looks him straight in the eyes with a slight polite smile and asks if Lord Essen has any ideas. Essen completely loses his head and shouts that he knows nothing. He tries to brush it off, saying that in that chaos everyone was confused, so people probably just saw everything wrong. Felsi simply nods and says she understands even he does not know what is going on here, even in the city. But suddenly her mood becomes very gloomy when she says that if there really was a monster behaving like a human, her church would have no other choice, it would have to intervene and carry out the execution. Essen stands with a fake smile, completely covered in sweat and frightened by what he just heard. Then Felsi suddenly glows with joy again and says she is sorry for taking so much of his time. As he runs away, she waves to him and thanks him, saying she hopes to meet again soon. Essen goes alone into the forest, completely exhausted and trembling after barely escaping trouble. Essen is still trembling after that conversation and thinks to himself that he never wants to see that priestess again. He makes his way back to the small stone building at the edge of the forest. In the quiet clinic where laundry is drying on ropes, everything finally begins to calm down, but Kit looks terrible. He is wrapped in bandages from head to toe like a mummy. Essen enters the room and quietly whispers Kit's name, a little worried. Nick immediately notices him and shouts at the top of his lungs, calling for his older brother, and Essen sees the boy really made it there. Yor looks up, smiles with relief, and asks, "Is that boy from the restaurant with him? I am so glad Essen is safe." Essen approaches the bed and asks everyone how Kit is really feeling. From under the blankets comes Kit's voice. The doctor said the wounds have healed, but he must stay here until the new skin takes hold. Essen explains that doctors also receive a special healing gift from the gods, then smiles. He just sighed with relief because his friend will be okay. From under the blanket, Keith begins to mutter quietly, and Essen leans in, listening intently. Then Keith lets out a loud, irritated scream through the gauze. But Essen only says he doesn't understand a word, though he is glad the boy is alive enough to complain. Kit covers his face with his bandaged hand and asks the children not to look at him. He is in such a miserable state. Essen looks at them and says he sincerely hopes that all this will not turn into some childhood trauma for the children. Nick does not tolerate this and directly tells Keith that he is wrong, because in reality he thinks Keith is insanely cool and it just can't be. He catches the big guy by surprise. Nick doesn't stop praises him. You were incredible in yesterday's fight and today you are still just as cool. Yor immediately rushes to help him and then looks at Keith with big hopeful eyes. She asks him if he thinks someone like her could ever grow up and become an adventurer like him. Keith was completely confused and turned away, huffing angrily, and Essen just stands and thinks that they are all kind of quirky. Although they grumbled, Nick and Yua just stood by the bed with huge smiles, proudly looking at their friend. You wave goodbye to the guys as they leave, and Nick says he has to go back to help run the shop. Leaving Essen alone with Keith, they walk away, and Essen watches them go and says he is sure those kids will grow up to be incredible adventurers, and this slightly confuses Keith. Essen did not stop, telling the giant that after seeing how he fought, there is no doubt you will manage too. Keith just snorted a little and said he already knew that, pretending it was no big deal and then he just lies in bandages, finally having some quiet to rest. Later Essen spoke again and said he has one request for you. But he freezes for a second, completely stunned. It seems Kit finally called him by his real name. Suddenly the scene shifts to a new place, the E-rank dungeon, known as the Reef of Roaring Tides where Essen catches up with Kit outside. He looks him over and says he's glad to see him again in perfect shape and Kit just shrugs and asks Essen who he thinks he's talking to because obviously he's fine. Keith warns Essen not to lose his head while they move, but Essen just smiles and says, "Leave everything to me," because they find themselves face to face with a huge one-eyed monster beetle that seems ready to smash them. The creature is struck by a huge burst of energy that lifts water and debris in all directions. The scene abruptly returns to the hospital and someone calls Essen's name. Looking at the forest, the voice says he has only one request and in the room Essen freezes in surprise. This guy is really asking him for a favor, and Kit looks away, awkwardly confirming. Keith sharply cuts him off, asking if he has a problem with that, and it only makes Essen laugh, remembering how often Keith called him a loser. But he quickly smiling says he's just joking and asks, "What's the request about?" Kit admits that these light jokes actually make his life easier and finally gets to the point, directly tells Essen that he wants him to help with hunting the monster. Keith recognizes the monster as a leaf shrimp, and Essen asks if it is the giant that everyone in the Tide Reef calls the strongest. It's Essen calls him, but Kit just sits on the edge of the bed, clenching his bandaged fists so tightly that they tremble. Keith begins to talk about himself, and Essen just stands and watches as he struggles to choose his words. Suddenly he just breaks down and calls himself a weakling, clearly showing how disappointed he is with his limits. He explains that although his gift is undoubtedly the strongest, his body simply cannot withstand such power. And since this dungeon is flooded with water, for him it is a complete failure. The best he can hope for is a draw. He looks straight ahead and admits, a few years ago he simply stopped even trying to clear that place. Essen cannot believe that this is coming from him, especially after the madness Kit pulled yesterday. A serious look appears in Kit's eyes, and he begins to explain why he behaved that way. He just told Essen that the sight of that monster reminded him of his hometown, and that was it. Kit quickly explains that he does not believe that someone deliberately released these monsters. It's just that he has already seen a crazy monster raid that destroyed his entire village. Essen just listens as Keith explains how he apologizes for mentioning it, but Essen quickly reassures, "Don't worry at all," and Kit continues saying that although his home was truly destroyed in the chaos, there was still a glimmer of hope in this story because even despite those ruins, not a single person died. He looks back and realizes it was all thanks to one brave adventurer who saved everyone. That guy was so seriously injured that he had to leave the game. He could have stayed if he just waited for help, but instead he decided to save the people standing right in front of him. Kit, recalling that scene, thinks about how that man stood firm and single-handedly protected every villager. Kit looks at Essen and tells him that to him that is exactly what true strength looks like in his opinion. Essen takes it all in and smiles. Finally, I told Kit. That is exactly why he said that when he himself was becoming stronger. Keith lifts his head from the hospital bed and tells the boy that he must get that loot of leaf shrimp because, caught off guard by the request, the boy repeats the monster's name, not understanding why this is what matters. Keith explains that if they defeat it, the guild will give a reward called Blessing of the Water Spirit. It is a special power. It heals and reduces burns, exactly what he needs to get back on his feet and the boy is delighted, smiling widely. He says that this reward seems made especially for him. Keith catches the boy with a cheeky smile and immediately asks angrily why he is making that silly grimace. But then he becomes serious and asks why the boy is trying so hard to help him specifically. The boy simply tells him that he felt they both have the same fire burning inside and immediately moves on. The boy dodges a giant shell as the monster crashes into the water with a loud splash. He barely avoids the attack and smiles, realizing that it is huge but moves much faster than it seems. Keith complains that because of the slippery floor he feels really uncomfortable. It's a complete mess. And the boy just says, "Stop whining," and calls him slow. Keith put on a serious expression and warned the boy, If you mess this up, it's the end for both of us. The boy just looks at the giant creature and jokes that he is glad to see it in such great shape today, even when huge waves crash around them and the monster becomes more and more aggressive. Soaked to the bone, the boy reminds himself that his only job now is to be bait, so he lunges forward and instantly strikes the monster's hard shell. It's annoying, but the boy knows. He doesn't have the raw strength that Keith has, and this creature is much tougher than the crabs he's used to. And he knows that Keith needs a minute to gather enough energy for a real finishing blow. The plan is simple. The boy will use speed to gradually wear down the monster's health and exhaust it, then Keith will come in and finish it off, so the boy starts jumping on the rocks, leading the huge beast on a wild chase across the water. The boy keeps teasing the beast. He says that although it has great strength, it only moves in a straight line. He is completely satisfied with the plan and confident that dodging that thing won't even be difficult. He shouts that such a big body will tire quickly, and now all he has to do is wait for Keith to arrive. He was caught by a sudden huge shockwave that completely took him by surprise and threw him far into the air. Standing aside, Keith sees the strike and shouts essence, as if starting to panic. He grits his teeth and shouts to his friend again, eyes wide open as he realizes how badly things have worsened. They realize too late that they are looking at the shrimp's most powerful move, a special air cannon that destroys everything in its path. The monster releases a huge explosion again, tearing the water and raising waves crashing everywhere around. Kit makes an irritated sound and rushes into action, speeding through splashes and smoke as fast as possible because he finally reaches the boy and, trying to protect him from the consequences, asks if he is okay. Keith stared ahead, eyes wide as saucers, all sweaty, and only then understood what kind of trouble they had gotten into. The boy tries to apologize for relaxing, but Kit sharply cuts him off. You cannot underestimate the enemy just because they are a team. Keith anxiously asks if the boy can still move, and when he says he can, he decisively says they need to gather quickly. He explained that he had to spend his fire charge just to make this rescue, and this left the boy in panic because he does not know what will happen next. The boy asks if there is any way to replenish his energy now, but there is no time to talk in. Another huge energy explosion swept across the battlefield, causing Kit to jerkily jump aside. Kit grumbled that now it will be truly difficult. The monster has targeted him as the main target. But he stops for a moment. Through the smoke, a beast is barely visible, and he realizes that something is wrong. The monster stared with one eye at both, aiming and loading its weapon. And Kit suddenly realizes, if there are two of them, then the monster has two guns already ready to fire. The boy begins to sweat. The realization strikes him. He asks what this really means for them. How? When the monster starts smashing everything around, Kit suddenly understands that the beast aimed at both at once, forcing them. Wading through the mud, the boy curses under his breath, trying to outrun the explosions. They look completely exhausted. He realizes, if the attacks continue like this, they won't even manage to catch their breath and recover. But still, Kit moves forward, though he is all in bandages. Someone calls Essen's name while Kit tries to find a chance. He decides to make his move right then, and suddenly a huge column of smoke rises. It covers the entire area. The smoke spreads across the field, momentarily hiding them from the monster's sight, and the attacks finally stopped. The boy asks in surprise if Kit's gift can really do that, but Kit only says it's just a distraction and it won't last long. He adds that by playing too cautiously, they are practically on the verge of ruin. He knows that just hiding every time the monster shoots won't bring them victory. They notice that as soon as their burn ointment runs out, they'll have to stop for today. The boy just looked at his ruined clothes and agreed he really didn't want to spend more money on lodging. Keith glances at the boy for a moment. Then he asks if his gift really allows him to transform into any monster, but the boy just shakes his head and explains that it doesn't work that way. Instead, parts of monsters he eats simply appear as new skills he can use. And Kit thinks about what a crazy gift this is that steals and devours, and jokes that the child might someday turn into a monster himself. That this clearly irritates the boy. He tells Kit to stop saying such creepy things, but Kit just looks at him seriously and says, "Don't worry." He promises that if that ever happens, he will intervene himself and personally sort everything out. The boy felt completely unsettled. He couldn't understand whether Kit really wanted to help or was just a bit too persistent, but now they have much bigger problems. Kit notices that they don't have a single monster skill that could hurt the creature they are fighting, so the boy suggests simply eating that creature and taking its power, but quickly dismisses it. It's easier said than done, because even approaching that monster is almost a suicidal act. But he decisively decides he himself will draw its attention in the next round. He looks for a weak spot. He asks if the antennas are not guarded, but he immediately begins to doubt himself, fearing that the thing will just pierce him through the throat if he tries anything. Kit is clearly irritated, turns to the boy whom he considers the one who ruined their plan, and sharply tells him to just step aside. He will handle this part himself. But the boy is still a bit anxious. He reminds Kit that even if he manages to eat part of the monster, there is no guarantee they will get a skill that can really save them. So, Kit says that he understands it well. He thinks that even if it is not a perfect solution, more weapons in their arsenal are always better than nothing. But both met with eyes full of pure determination. They both shouted that it was time to move and a huge monster just sits in the middle of the lake waiting for them. Suddenly, right in front of them, a huge wall of water explodes, momentarily stunning them. Keith stands on a rock in the middle of the water. Clearly irritated, he realizes that his attack did not hit as he wanted. He raises his hands, they begin to glow with power. He admits that he did not plan everything this way, but for now he will be the bait, distracting. Causing the monster a huge attack, water rises and scatters around him in all directions. Preparing to take the hit, Kit notices an important thing: the monster's attacks lose much strength when released from afar. The monster's attack crashed into the boy's defense and a huge shockwave rose. Energy spins relentlessly in a furious whirl. The boy suddenly realizes the two forces simply cancel each other out. But Kit looks focused and says, "This is not cancellation, this is synergy." The two of them break through the explosion together, combining their forces for a powerful counterattack. The girl holds her breath and watches as the boy rushes at the monster, while the cat does not take his eyes off the fight. A message popped up on the screen: he just acquired the skill Leaf Shrimp Blank Cannon. The boy says he will use it right now, throws himself forward and he fires a powerful volley that tears through the water and rushes straight at the monster. He is stunned how strongly the recoil of the attack actually hits him. The boy thinks his last strike was too weak to knock down the monster, but the cat loudly shouts that everything is fine, leaving the boy. I am completely stunned when the cat explains how the monster's air cannon works, compressing air in its claws. He suggests that if he releases his flames at the same moment the air cannon fires, they can create something colossal. They both struggle against the pressure, and the monster relentlessly pushes back. The cat shouts that there is no time to explain, and orders the boy to just fire the air cannon at full power. The boy asks if such a move will really be enough to win, and the cat admits he doesn't know, but they have to take the risk anyway. The boy dares to trust him and says that he is going together because Keith unleashes his prominence flames, and at the same moment the boy releases his explosion. Two streams of energy merged into one giant beam that struck directly into the monster's chest. And everything explodes, piercing a huge hole right in the middle of the beast. Keith and the boy, holding their breath, watch intently as their combined strike hits the target. A huge explosion tore the monster to pieces and filled everything around with thick smoke. When the dust finally settled, both stood amid the remains of the beast they had just felled. The boy bursts with joy, shouting that they really caught it, while Keith just stands and watches. It looked cool when the boy raised his finger up to him and said that they won the whole victory thanks to his cleverness. Keith just smiles and says, "Of course," boasting a little as if he really is the strongest. He sharply descends and grabs a part of the monster, asking if these shrimp legs will really bring him the blessing of the water spirit. Looking at the prize, he notices that it is slightly burnt from the explosion, but decides that it should still work. He holds his leg raised to the sky, thinking that it will help him reach a completely new level. Kate asks what's next, and the guy admits that his wallet is empty and he needs to go home. There's not even money for the entrance. The guy glances to the side and asks Kate what he plans to do now. Now Kate says he will stay here a bit because he promised to help train his new apprentice. The guy realizes that this is where their paths diverge, says goodbye, and Kate says he hopes that next time they meet again, both will be top adventurers. The guy just smiles and says that's exactly what he intends to do. As they head in opposite directions, the guy tells him that he really helped out and thanks him. Kate turned around with a smile and shouted loudly, "Thank you." The boy laughed and told him that he is always welcome here. They seal it with a firm fist bump and finally set off. Everything moves to the huge stone entrance of the main headquarters. The official guild. This is where all high-ranking adventurers gather to find work. Polaris is just walking along when suddenly someone from behind shouts her name. And it turns out to be Wellness, who is leaning against the wall and telling her that she looks incredibly beautiful today. She does not fall for this act at all and asks if he was just lying, hoping she would appear again. Wellness, an adventurer of the high 73rd rank, just laughs and says it was pure coincidence, but Polaris is indifferent and tells him directly to stop following her. She does not want to join his party at all. She looks him straight in the eyes and says coldly, "You will only hold me back." Wellness just takes the blow with a smile and says that she is still as strict as ever. He walked beside her, quietly confessing that his gift is not for attacks and therefore might not suit her character. Although he is still convinced that their different abilities would make them perfect opponents in battle. Then he becomes a bit more serious and says that he actually came for something completely different, leaving Polaris quite puzzled. Wellness begins to tell that recently he was quite surprised. He recalled seeing her glance at the ranking board and then suddenly rushed down to the lower district. Polaris directly asks if he was following her, and he just chuckles and waves it off, as if such a noble lady as she is shouldn't be found in such a disgusting place. She sharply replies that it's none of his business, tells him to stop babbling and just go away, but he just throws her a look like that and asks if he really was following her. Wellness froze for a moment, trying to remember if that boy was named Essen. And then he says he has never seen her with such an expression on her face before. He leans closer and whispers for her not to worry. Right now he doesn't intend to do anything with that boy. He keeps insisting that people of high status should behave a bit more dignified. He moved right up to her face and told her to stop hanging out with trashy adventure seekers, because of them all those of high rank look bad. Wellness leans closer and tells Polaris that what happens to that child depends on how you behave from now on, and Polaris she just grits her teeth, and Wellness laughs and says they probably should stop the trash talk for today. Polaris silently walks away, but Wellness shouts after her that she really needs to think it over. He says his door is always open, and she turns and looks at him with complete disgust. We move on. Above the streets and rooftops of the city shines a bright noon when, meanwhile, in the Junior Guild of Adventures everything buzzed. Everyone is bustling and heading outside, including. Essen looks at the scoreboard and sees his name in 65,000th place. He clenches his fist and is excited before the jump, especially because he remembers how last time he got stuck at 85,000, and it turned out that the recent expedition really raised his position seriously. He blushes a little with joy. The rank increase happened only because of that crazy monster attack. Alulu notices Essen walking through the guild, calls out his name. He stops and waves back SH. She tells him that too much time has passed since she last saw him, and officially welcomes him back to the office. She has already read the report from the church and knows about the recent incident. It must have been a real nightmare. Essen just laughs and pretends he doesn't care, telling her it's nothing. He did almost nothing, just happened to be there. But Alulu won't tolerate this. She calls him a liar and shows him the official report published about his great battle with the monster. Essen was quite shocked that she got so deep into the details, but only said that it's her job, especially when he gets into trouble. He simply gives her a smile and says he is grateful for the help, although he never thought he would receive so much attention. Alulu starts to panic, waving her hands, her face bright red, swearing that she supposedly is not stalking him and not doing anything crazy that makes us. Essen tell her that he understands this, and since he is still just a low-ranking guy, it's cool to know what she thinks about them. Realizing that it is actually crazy to receive so much support when there are thousands of other adventurers in the city. Essen just stands, smiling widely and thinking to himself that Lady Alulu is definitely a top professional because of her dedication. But Alula is completely confused, shouting that this is just her job. She is merely a lower-rank employee in the guild. She stubbornly insists that she really does not have free time to run around and cheer up certain adventurers like him. Essen asks if she is really angry about something, and this only makes her sharply reply that she is not angry at all. She quiets down a bit after that, looking at her papers, and admits that she is just glad he returned safe and Essen just gently looked at her, saying with his eyes that he hears her. Alulu regains her strength and gives him a radiant smile, encouragingly telling him to stay alert and not stop trying. But then she starts a conversation about serious rumors. Supposedly strange devices have recently begun appearing in the lower quarters, and all this happened right after that last incident. Essen agreed that security in this part of the city was quite poor, so he also asked her to take care of herself. She appreciates that. Until she suddenly lowers her head, hiding her face, and awkwardly says that the topic needs to be changed. Alulu pulls out a notebook and proudly shows a special summary about the dungeon, which she compiled herself with a huge smile. Essen was touched that she did it with her own hands just for him, and she admits that she chose places that perfectly match his skill level. Essen is simply delighted and thanks her sincerely for all the work she put into the guide. The best choice is a place called House and Valley, which is essentially a bunch of cool cliffs and rivers making it. This is the toughest challenge Essen has faced so far, but he knows he must accept it. Looking at the monsters circling around, he realizes most adventurers can't handle such a place, especially with. Around a wild terrain, giant stone pillars grow everywhere. Essen begins to make his way through the rocks, confident that his current gift will help him cope with everything he encounters on the path. But suddenly a huge bird monster falls from the sky and grabs someone, who screams that they will be eaten. But it turns out to be a girl with a wild look, who screams that she is going to eat someone. Essen notices other adventurers in the distance, and immediately worries that they are being attacked. At the very moment when the wild bird girl was grabbed and carried into the sky, she was screaming all the way. Essen recognizes the monster of Valley Falcon and feels, standing idly by is not an option. He must save her. But as soon as he tries to move, he suddenly feels sick and clutches his head in pain. He suddenly realizes that he is not yet used to his new eyes, and forces himself to turn off this power. When he raises his eyes again, he is stunned by how far the bird has already flown. Meanwhile, the girl excitedly shouts about how cool this is. She is finally flying. Since the birds have not eaten her yet, she thinks they are probably carrying her back to the nest to eat later. But then she looks down and sees something rushing swiftly below. Essen breaks through the pain and rushes forward, shouting that he is coming to save her. Essens dashed forward, completely confused the monster had just spoken to him, and the wild bird girl was already starting to panic. He remains calm because he has already scouted the area with his powers. Right beneath them is a deep river that will catch their fall. He puts all his last bits of strength into one final burst, shouting that he is not finished yet. He calls his skill Wings to activate and slices through the air with a huge arc of energy. The strike hits the leg of the giant bird directly, and the girl doesn't even have time to realize what is happening. Everything shakes. Essence screams an attack with a sharp claw and tears the monstrous bird apart, making it howl, and the girl finally lose. She loses her balance and rapidly falls down to the bottom of the canyon, screaming at the top of her lungs. She looks up in complete shock as the bird's claw is torn apart and blood splashes everywhere. Suddenly, a system message pops up on the screen. He has won the silver wings of the falcon. Essen sees this and immediately understands everything. It's time to act, and they both disappear in a dazzling flash of light, falling. Essen reaches out his hand at the moment they are rapidly falling, and shouting, asks the girl to give him her hand to save her. She screams in response and reaches out her hand, almost touching his as they fall through the air. In the air, and yet they finally firmly grasp each other's hands, while the feathers of the huge bird swirl around them. The wings skill activates, and Essen tightly embraces her, gliding through the canyon under huge outstretched white wings. When the earth rushes swiftly towards you, someone thinks they managed to stop the fall at the last moment, but they crash right into the river with a loud splash, and Essen admits that they definitely didn't manage to break. The canyon fell silent for a second. The two of them floated in the water, surrounded by tall cliffs. Essen, looking at his ruined clothes, apologizes for the rough landing, but the girl just looks at him as if reminding him that he literally just saved them. He gives her a broad, relieved smile and asks if she got hurt anywhere from the fall showing. He worries more about her than himself, grabs her hand again, and says they need to take care of something important now. The girl from the canyon is simply going crazy from what she saw, shouting at Essen to say what kind of creature it was and whether it was even human at all. She presses close to his face, asks if it's some special gift because of how those monstrous parts grew from him, and is so excited that she begs to do it again. Essen just stands there, completely stunned and not quite sure how to react to her suddenly becoming so friendly. She laughs and rubs her head, apologizing for getting a little too carried away, and Essen looks completely exhausted after all this. With a broad, confident smile, she finally introduces herself as Ryuka, looking nothing like the one who attacked him. She realizes she hasn't properly thanked him yet, so she pauses for a moment, wondering what to do next, as if Essen tells her his name and she immediately exclaims a big thank you to him. He looks at her puzzled while she puts on her jacket again and asks if she is really not afraid of him at all. Essen says that her reaction is completely different because most people become wary of someone who looks like a monster, even if that one just saved them. Ruka looks at him seriously and explains that monster species are always tied to specific dungeons, and barriers never allow them to leave those places. Ruka raises a finger thoughtfully and suddenly realizes his strange transformation might turn out to be a rare gift. Essen nods, standing in the middle of the canyon, but admits that there is still a chance maybe he is just a new kind of monster they have not seen before. A very tense, piercing expression appears on her face, and she begins to say something. Suddenly, she completely loses her head, blushes, and shouts how insanely much she loves monsters. Essen looks completely frightened when she tells him that even if he really were one, she would not care. He looks at her with complete disbelief when she says that she actually wants to get even closer to a humanoid monster like him. She starts going crazy with excitement. She is a fan of how cool they are, obsessed with how their bodies are made for hunting, and finds their appearance simply irresistible. She even admits that she previously deliberately let him catch her just to get a better look at his figure. She did not care what would happen next. Yesin tries to step away and pretend that she does not notice him, but she persistently follows him closely. She begged him to transform again just to see those wings and fangs one more time. The hand does not stop pressing until the boy finally admits that he really does not want to show off his secret gift, and she just bursts into his face and asks if he is ashamed, because she has already seen the form anyway. Finally, he gives in and says okay, and she goes crazy with impatience to see it again. The boy, fully focused, calls upon the power of the silver wings and suddenly those huge feathered wings spread wide open, and the hand froze in pure admiration. There are stars in her eyes, and she cannot help but scream with excitement how cool it looks. The boy just looks back over his shoulder and asks if this is really what she wanted. The hand does not even have time to answer. She immediately rushes, hugs the feathers, and exclaims that they feel like real ones. She begins grabbing and squeezing them so hard that he lets out a frightened scream, but she does not stop rubbing her face against them and keeps saying that they are much softer and darker than she expected. The boy lets out a loud scream, while Ruka keeps fiddling with the feathers and mutters that they don't smell like a beast. Finally, he bursts out and tells her to stop. She jumps around him like a child and completely distracts him. So that he can maintain form, the wings crumble into fluff and feathers, leaving the boy completely breathless. He looks her straight in the eyes and says the show is over, and that's definitely not what Ruka wanted to hear, but he says that he really feels creepy when she licks them. It turns out he feels everything through those wings, and her touch is it's just too strange for him. Ruka slouches, clearly quite disappointed, muttering that they weren't going to break or anything, but then the boy got even more embarrassed and, blushing, admitted that when her breasts are pressed so close to him, he gets uneasy. Ruka finally gives in, says she'll stop if he really hates it that much, and the boy feels pretty pathetic because of his reaction. The boy stands trying to fix his gear and Ruka just watches him, her gaze becoming serious as she asks if Essen is really just a low-rank adventurer. The boy is embarrassed and doesn't understand why she's asking now, and she just points at his clothes. He's still completely a mess. The boy explains that as adventurers rise in rank, they start using gear made from monster parts because it can heal itself. He looks at his torn things and realizes how much damage they took during the fight, and he tells Ruka that she strangely knows a lot about high-level gear and can't help but ask if she's really some elite adventurer, but the hand simply laughed and declared that he was mistaken. With a proud smile, she closed her eyes and explained that she was actually a craftswoman. She raised a finger to catch his gaze and began to make him quite an offer. She says that she had long thought about crafting new equipment for him herself. They stand before a huge mechanical building that seems to have giant legs, and the scale of the workshop is simply insane. It towers, covered with metal cladding and strange pipes. The hand mischievously stuck out her tongue and told him that this was how she thanked him for saving her life and giving her the chance to see his special power. She spreads her arms wide and shouts, "Tada!" As they approach the entrance doors, this is how she officially introduces him to her workshop. The boy froze, completely speechless. He looked up at this enormous structure, barely believing what he saw, and he suddenly realizes he would never have guessed that such a place stood right here on the edge of the city. The boy thinks to himself, although this is his first time at a master class, everything here is just too pretentiously The hand laughs and jokes that it is more of a monster than a shop. The boy looks tiredly, asks why it has legs, and says it looks like a huge spider. As they walk, the hand explains that she actually summoned this entire place with her gift, what she herself calls her workshop of magical engineering. The boy climbs the stairs after her and admits that having a craft gift is actually pretty cool. Ryuko twirls her finger in front of him and says that he misunderstands how her power works. She says that most craftsmen are just ordinary blacksmiths or cooks who engage in simple crafts. Her power is completely different. It is a gift created specifically for advanced technique and true mastery. She smiles broadly and says that her gift stands out among all just as his does. The boy smiles in response and asks if that means she is special too. Ryuka laughed and said she liked how that sounded, then went to the door to show him what was inside. Ryuka orders the boy to hurry and go inside. He enters the workshop and, completely stunned, looks around. The huge furnace and pile of tools simply amaze him. Ryuka walks straight to the back of the room where the fire burns, passing by her tools. The boy notices a huge pile of books and various monster parts stacked in the corner and cannot help but admire them. Looking at all the hammers and tools lying around, he tells Ryuka that she really looks like a true master. Ryuka, as if it were obvious, says she needs to prepare a bit so he can go and look around as he pleases. The boy says he already started doing that, throws her a quick smile and begins to explore the room. He finds on one of the desks a terrible monster jaw with rows of sharp teeth. The boy leans closer, wondering if it might be some rare medium-grade material, but as soon as he reaches out his hand, the jaw suddenly snaps shut right on his hand. He starts screaming in pain, and the hand calmly tells him that he probably shouldn't touch things so carelessly. Meanwhile, while the boy panics and screams that his fingers are about to be bitten off, the hand just stands and laughs at him. Eventually, the boy's finger was tightly wrapped with heavy bandages to stop the bleeding. The hand carelessly explained that materials from the undead monsters always behave like that, and the boy just sat and cried, saying she should have told him earlier. She doesn't feel guilty at all and reminds him that he approached and touched it himself, although she only allowed him to inspect it. The boy excuses himself, saying he just couldn't know because it was a real trap. Suddenly, Ryuka's eyes lit up, and she exclaimed that she just came up with something very cool. She abruptly moved, saying that she would immediately come up with a completely new plan for his equipment. She quickly opens a notebook and focuses, preparing to start drawing new equipment. A strange expression appears on Ryuka's face, and she says it's already late, so there's no point in wasting time. She lifts the centimeter tape, smiles broadly, and tells him that since she is sewing his gear, he needs to take off his clothes so she can take measurements. The boy just stands there, his face blank. He is completely stunned by what she just asked him to do. Ruka starts stripping off her clothes and urgently tells him they need to hurry because it is getting dark. The boy explodes, "You can't just undress people like that. and she just wants to know why he is so shy. He tries to explain that he simply wasn't ready for this, but Ryuka waves it off. She says she has already seen plenty of naked boys. While they argue, someone in white boots walks straight to the workshop. A sudden loud knock on the door catches them both by surprise. From the other side, a clear voice calls out, "Ryuka, are you here?" The door opens. Polaris stands on the threshold and says she needs to fix her sword. She freezes mid-sentence and stands completely stunned, looking at the shirtless boy. The boy can't believe his eyes and shouts her name, while Ryuka just greets her as if it's no big deal. He completely loses his mind, asking why the highest-ranked ice princess ended up in such a place at all. In the workshop, it suddenly becomes completely quiet, and Polaris stands over the boy, arms crossed, looking at him challengingly. The boy sits on a wooden stool, shirtless, all sweaty, as if he found himself in the very heart of a nightmare. Polaris freezes for a moment, trying to understand what she sees. Her eyes are fixed on him while he tries to think of what to say. He smiles nervously and tells Polaris that they haven't seen each other for a long time. But Polaris does not feel friendly at all. She looks at him coldly and says that it is probably true. He tries to lighten the mood, laughing and saying that he is just shocked that they ran into each other in such a place. Polaris squints, her gaze becomes like a blade, and she replies to him briefly and icily, and suddenly the room starts to get sharply colder. Icy air swirls around her feet. The boy begins to shiver, noticing the air has chilled, and at that moment Polaris asks if she is really interrupting something between him and Ryuka. She looks at him with a dark, frightening gaze, as if saying that he really doesn't need to pretend anymore. Polaris looks the boy over from head to toe and says that his current appearance reveals everything. She says that he seems to be having a lot of fun, but he panics and shouts that she misunderstood everything. Ryuka just took off his clothes. He is trying to get out of the hole, explaining that he literally just met Ryuka today, but this only makes Polaris even more skeptical. She keeps saying over and over that he is hanging out at the house of a girl he just met. The guy completely loses his head, realizing too late that his explanation made everything sound much worse than it actually was. He wildly waves his hands, shouting that it is all just one big misunderstanding. Polaris does not look convinced at all, just noting that he seems to have too much free time for someone who is supposedly an adventurer. He immediately cut in, "Not at all, I have actually been busy all the time." The guy explains that he took off his shirt only because he needed to take measurements, and insists that there is nothing suspicious here. He has no time to hang around with girls. And suddenly Polaris smiled slightly and told him that she was just joking all along. Polaris admits that she teased him only because, seeing his face after so many years, she couldn't resist. She wanted to joke a little. The guy tells her to stop because her teasing is really scary, and Polaris just quickly apologizes. She continues to explain that she has known Ryuka for a long time and definitely knows what kind of girl she is. This suddenly makes the guy realize that Ryuka must be the one who makes all of Polaris' elite equipment. Polaris confirms that's how it is. They say Ryuka is actually famous among elite adventurers, a master of the highest level who really knows her craft. The boy is completely stunned by this news, and Polaris says that she herself is surprised to see him wandering there. At that very moment, Ryuka called from another room, "Sorry, Polaris, for making you wait so long." And she appears with a huge sword to hand it over, telling her that the repair is already finished. Polaris quickly thanks her, but Ryuka just shrugged and said that there really wasn't much to fix there. Ryuka says that Polaris always helps a lot, and the girl explains that she just slightly adjusted the spear tip so that magic flows better through it. Ryuka couldn't hold back a smile and sincerely told Polaris that she really takes great care of all her equipment. While Polaris tests the energy in her palm, she calmly asks if Ryuka really thinks so. So Polaris says it's only because Ryuka makes such high-quality things, and the girl got embarrassed and shouted at her, "Stop it." The boy was left thinking how crazy it is that a top ranker considers her a master, and wonders if someone so skilled will really make equipment for him. Ryuka suddenly realized that she had been ignoring him, and sincerely apologizes to Essen for having delayed his request for so long. But Essen just smiles and tells her that everything is perfectly fine after all. She is still doing him a favor. Ryuka grabs her tools and promises him that she will finish everything for him right now. Polaris silently stands aside, crossing her arms, quietly watching as they work together. Ryuka stands close behind the boy to start measuring and adjusting his back. Ryuka writes a few lines on a scrap of paper and suddenly starts talking to change the subject. She glances at both of them and asks if they really know each other. The boy says that they do, and Polaris agrees, although she seems a bit more reserved. Polaris pours herself a drink and, seemingly indifferent, adds that it is more of a coincidence they are just from the same city. Ryuka finds this quite interesting. You don't see that every day. She notes that both of you now go on adventures alone, and asks why you don't work together if you are from the same place. Maybe you just don't get along. The boy laughs awkwardly and admits that they really once, when they were just starting out, tried to form a team, but Polaris takes a sip of her drink and explains that the difference in their skill levels became noticeable almost immediately. She cast a serious look and said that it was actually Essen who decided to break up the party. This completely embarrassed the boy, and he became awkward, trying to apologize for how everything turned out then. The boy smiled a little awkwardly and admitted he had always known that he was only holding her back. Ruka nods and says that everything is clear. Polaris's rise to power was, honestly, on a completely different level. She tells how Polaris came out of nowhere and quickly flew into the upper ranks, hitting 9th place. In just a year, it's incredible, especially considering that most people don't even break into the top 10,000. The figurine of Ruka Essen simply did not want her nose to be a friend, probably out of pride, but the boy looked her straight in the eyes and said that a high rank means nothing if the person really doesn't have the skills. Ruka smiled and inadvertently said how much she liked Essen's attitude, and this completely caught Polaris by surprise. Ruka teases them even more, and the boy loses his head and shouts that she misunderstood them. Then, returning to business, Ruka ran her feather over his hand, leaving a mark, and says she will make equipment that truly matches his determination. Polaris looks at them attentively, wondering why a master of the highest level would take such a step for a person like him. Ruka licks her lip and smiles slyly, explaining that making this equipment is her way of thanking him for saving her in the dungeon. Polaris closes his eyes and absorbs everything, finally understanding why the trapper tries so hard. Looking back, Ruka remembers that their first meeting was exactly like this, when chaos reigned around and people were shouting for help. Polaris points out how Ruka even managed to drag Essen into her drama, and this completely throws the master off. He begins to apologize for all the trouble. The guy simply confidently gave a thumbs up, and told both of them that he was 100% sure from now on Essen would become much stronger. And Polaris looks at him for a moment, then quietly agrees. She smiles to herself and says that she is actually looking forward to it, because she would be bored if he remained weak. A serious expression flashed in the guy's eyes, and he promised her that he would definitely catch up with her and be where she is. Ruka and Polaris exchanged a glance. Both felt the weight of his determination, and for a second the room became quiet. And so, when Polaris finally decides to go home, Ryuka and the boy wave goodbye to her as she disappears down the street. The door clicked, a voice called out. Ryuka and Wellness just walked in. He grinned boldly at Polaris and throwing out, "Leave me alone already," asked why she was hanging out in such a wilderness again. Polaris completely loses his head, shouts his name and accuses him of following her all the way here. The boy just stands looking confused, and Polaris begins to sweat from stress. A creepy gleam appears in Wellness's eyes, and Polaris wonders if the appearance right now is just a coincidence. She just looks at him with fierce hatred, pronouncing his name as if it were a curse. The boy tries to gather his thoughts and asks if this guy is someone Polaris knows, and at that moment Wellness finally notices him standing there. Wellness suddenly covers his nose with his hand and grimaces, as if he sensed something utterly disgusting in the air. He approaches the boy directly, looks him up and down with those icy eyes in them. It is clear he considers him inferior. The boy finally loses control a little, looks the man in the eyes and asks what his business is. Wellness just stands, covering his mouth with his hand, and laughs to himself as if he has some big secret. He looks at the boy with an expression of pure disgust, and asks why such a miserable person is even allowed to be in such a place. The sudden offense completely caught the boy off guard, just looks at that guy and asks what his problem is. Polaris finally can't take it and says to Wellness, "Just stop," but he only sighs wearily. He tells Polaris that hanging out with a rat like this guy is beneath her dignity, and completely ruins her image. Wellness noticed Ryuka and, giving unsolicited advice, said that she really needs to start choosing better clients. He doesn't calm down, insisting that letting people like that guy in will only ruin her reputation. Ryuka is not going to sit idly by. She sharply told him that she chooses her guests herself. This is her house, so she will accept anyone she wishes. She sharply says, as far as she remembers, she never even invited him. Wellness didn't even react to the refusal. He just smiled and said that he would leave soon anyway, because he came only for Polaris. The guy is not going to tolerate those insults, so he yells at Wellness to wait. He decisively turned back and said directly that he is too rude and blurted out, "Who are you anyway?" Wellness throws him a look full of pity, as if saying that the guy clearly doesn't know how to address the boss and that a low-ranking rat shouldn't allow himself such insolence. He smirked, acting as if it's not the children's fault that they know nothing after all. They live in completely different worlds. He puts his hand on his chest and boasts that he is the 73rd and a true gifted genius. But then he burst out laughing loudly and shouted that he is actually Polaris's guy, and Ryuka and everyone else just froze. Polaris just stands with an empty gaze and can't even comprehend what he just said. The boy is no less stunned, looking at that guy as if his whole world suddenly turned upside down. He is gripped by panic, asks what is happening, and turns to Polaris to find out if any of this is true. Polaris is sweating now, just staring at Wellness and thinking about what game he is trying to play. Polaris is completely confused, her hair covering her eyes. She thinks tensely and suddenly realizes If she doesn't agree to support this story, everything with that boy could turn into a real mess. Wellness just hums a tune to himself and walks away as if he is the king of the world, and the boy stands silently. Polaris remains behind, pale and seemingly unwell. She tries to find words but cannot. She exhales shakily, and the boy stands completely broken. Finally, she forces herself to say that everything Wellness said is actually true. The boy just mumbles that he understands, pretends to be indifferent, tells her that they are no longer children, so supposedly such things happen, although inside he is clearly dying. Polaris literally trembles, covers her face with her hand and barely holds on. Meanwhile, Wellness behaves arrogantly and proudly, looking at the sky. He plays with his collar, acts like a true drama queen, and tells them that this is exactly how it is. Wellness tells the boy that once he understands, he should never show them his ugly face again. Then he takes Polaris away, leaving the boy in the dust behind. The boy's eyes have an expression as if his heart was just ripped out, but Wellness is indifferent. He just calls Polaris and says it's time for them to go home. A lonely signpost stands out in the middle of a quiet field. Time passes, and quiet giggling broke the night silence, and immediately after it someone burst out laughing loudly, which echoed throughout the neighborhood. Polaris looks at the ground and asks Wellness if he is really happy with how everything went, then harshly puts him in his place, saying he is immature and has terrible taste. Wellness didn't even flinch, said of course he was happy, and asked her if she saw that pathetic expression on the boy's face. He smiled eerily and said that today he really saw something special. Polaris directly tells him that Essen is not the type to break Wellness, but he just waved it off as if it were a joke. He leaned in with a condescending smile and said that for someone who won't break, this boy looks like he's suffering. Polaris's eyes narrowed. She realizes that the boy who made this mess is also the most proud of it. She starts to walk away, saying she feels like a complete failure for even agreeing to such a stupid lie. She tells him that she would usually just get rid of him right now, but she is not going to be punished for attacking another adventurer. Looking back with pure hatred, she hissed that she would never give up her gift because of such a petty failure like him. She walks away, whispering her last warning to him: "You really shouldn't underestimate Essen." Polaris looks Wellness in the eyes. In her gaze a true fire, she tells him that Essen will reach the top on her own, and she is completely serious, because this is the promise they made to each other. She stands close to his face and swears that she will take all that trash energy he gives out and throw it back at him. Wellness doesn't even look worried. He just stands there with that irritating little smirk. He even laughed, called her trust in the guy incredible, and aloud doubted whether that guy even has what it takes to get back on his feet. As he walks away, he tells her that even if that guy manages to get back up, it doesn't matter because he will just come and crush him into the dirt like an insect. Finally, the sun sets over the city, and everything plunges into a cold, silent shadow. People leave the streets and head home, leaving the alleys dark and… Meanwhile, the guy finally reaches his place, dragging himself up the stairs and pushing open his room door. He doesn't even take off his gear, he just faceplants onto the bed, completely broken from everything that happened. The guy stares into emptiness and doesn't understand why everything Wellness said hits him so deeply. He just can't get those words out of his head. He thinks about the fact that Polaris supposedly already has a lover. It should be simple, but it gnaws at him because he realizes that she is already the strongest adventuress here with her equipment master and partner, who can truly keep up with her in battle. He begins to ask himself why she would even wait for someone like him. She already has plenty of partners who are not a burden, so. And he agonizes, does she remain faithful because of some old promise, or does she simply pity him? He remembers how everything was different once when she really needed him by her side. The scene returns to their childhood, a night near a quiet house, and the only sound is a little girl crying bitterly in a dark room. Little Polaris curled up in a corner and sat until she heard someone calling her name from the window. The boy tells her that it is him and that they need to get out of here right now. She can hardly believe he appeared, but he tells her that he will no longer allow her to live in a house with such a cruel father. He is determined to take her away from there forever. Polaris panics and asks where they could possibly go, and the boy simply says that anywhere is better than this place. The father notices them and shouts loudly, demanding to know what they think they are doing, while the boy tries to pull her away. The man loses control, shouts that they have ruined his house and smashes a bottle on the boy's head, and Polaris can only scream when. The boy stands his ground, covering her, takes a powerful blow right in the face, and does not back down. They manage to break free, and he tells her that wherever they go he will be the one to protect her. While they rest, the boy asks if she still remembers the dream he told her about, and this leads to. He carried her on his back and said that at 10 years old he would become a traveler, and they would become the best duo ever. Time passes and Polaris learns that her gift is called Silver World. It gives her the power to control ice, and the boy is thrilled and only thinks. He thought she would be extraordinarily strong, but froze in surprise when she casually tore the landscape apart with a huge ice attack. Finally, she begins to climb the ladder and excitedly shows him that her rating has jumped again. Polaris tells S. Being where she is now is not enough. She keeps climbing because her true goal is to take first place in the ranking. She looks back and with a huge smile says the name Essen, but then suddenly the boy sharply wakes up in bed, sits up, and looks completely confused and out of sorts. The morning sun hits his eyes, and he just sits on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands, as if the day started very hard. He repeats to himself that everything is going badly, and thinks about how pathetic and ridiculous that dream really was. Thinking that waking up like this is a pathetic start to the day, he goes out to the yard to the stone well. He splashed icy water on his face, trying to come to his senses from that depressed state. He sat down by the bucket, the other boys were wandering behind and he was stuck in his own thoughts. Water drips from his hair and he wonders, what is really the reason that Polaris still even cares about him? Realizing that she is probably the person who would never break a promise, he thought, that's it. The boy stared into the water and thinks that he really needs to go apologize to Ryuka. He doesn't even remember the details, but is almost sure that he just left without saying a word and that. He feels like a complete idiot because of his rudeness. He looks over the hills toward the place where she stopped, and sees Ryuka just sitting by the fire, patiently waiting for her clothes to dry on the nearby rope. As soon as she notices him approaching, her face lights up, and she happily says that he finally came. The boy immediately bowed his head and apologized for just disappearing yesterday, and she only laughed and said, don't worry. She admits she was actually a little worried because before leaving, he suddenly looked completely out of sorts, and that made him feel. I feel even worse because he keeps apologizing. Ryuka looks a bit embarrassed when he mentions Essen, but she quickly waved her hand, clasped her palms, and told him that she was just glad that he really came back. She recalls the equipment he talked about yesterday and with a smile says that it is already ready, asking him to try it on to see how it looks. The boy loses his head and shouts, how could this happen so fast? I only told her about it yesterday. Ryuka just burst out laughing and said that once she started it was so fun that she couldn't stop, while the boy stands stunned that someone can work so fast. He can't suppress a smile. Ryuka is truly on a completely different level than anyone he has met. She points to the table saying that the whole set is already ready and waiting for him to try it on. Without wasting a minute, he begins clicking the armor parts into place, feeling how the quality equipment fits perfectly. When he finally dressed, he asks Ryuka if he put everything on correctly. She shows a new headband, and with a smile explains that she made it specially to protect his head, because that is usually where most monsters aim. The rest of the suit is made for speed. Light monster fibers and magic-infused plates on all vital spots protect him without slowing him down. And the coolest thing is the form memory feature. The armor literally repairs itself if damaged in battle. Although the materials were of average quality, she confidently assures him, this suit will withstand even the most dangerous high-rank dungeons. The boy starts jumping in his new equipment, loudly exclaiming how light and cool it is, while Ryuka simply glows with pride for her finished work. Ryuka suggests testing the equipment's self-repair function, and the boy enthusiastically agrees to see it in action. She pauses for a second to admire her work and says how wonderful his wings look in the new suit, and he just stands there. The fabric on the armor begins to shift and tear as the self-repair magic activates, and the boy is completely stunned, shouting that the repair function really works right before his eyes. He looks more closely at the quality and suddenly realizes that she used Class C materials for all of this, which makes him panic a little. He asks her if a suit of that class is really incredibly expensive. Ryuka just smiles broadly and says, don't worry, I consider this an investment in your future. But she adds that next time she will definitely charge him money, so he better get stronger and start earning for real. The boy agrees and nods but quiets down a bit, thinking about what it really means to become stronger doing re. Ryuka wonders if she accidentally killed all the hype by becoming too serious about the future. Ryuka suddenly catches the boy with a question about whether Essen really had a weakness for Polaris. While they sit by the campfire, she keeps the conversation alive, deliberately steering it toward how Essen behaved around her. She directly asked him whether, in his opinion, Essen really loved her that much. The boy quiets down and looks away, admitting that when you think about it, maybe it was so. He asks her if she really caught that atmosphere, and Ryuka says she definitely felt it, explaining that when a person is so obviously depressed and openly talks about it, everyone will notice. The boy only faintly smiled and said he understood what she meant, feeling a bit exposed. He collapses by the fire, completely knocked out by this heavy topic. Ryuka tells him that if he needs to vent, he can always talk to her. She says that in her work she often sees how people exhaust all their strength and forever abandon the life of adventure. Ryuka lowers her gaze and says that even the strongest sometimes cannot recover after losing a friend. She says that some, even with great gifts, are betrayed by their party, and others simply reach their limit and give up. But then she tells the boy that she sincerely believes everyone here is strong both in body and heart. She says that everyone who risks their life fighting monsters must have the strength of spirit to look fear in the face. Even the strongest things have their limits, and she proves it by cracking a small nut. After delivering the blow, the shell split open, and the fragments rolled on the ground. Looking him straight in the eyes, she says that no matter how hard a thing seems on the outside, it has a weak spot. Especially because inside everything is much more fragile than that tough shell. The boy is silent, looking at the floor, comparing himself to that cracked walnut and feeling as if he has finally been broken open. Ryuka tells him at the end that keeping everything inside doesn't help, and when it becomes too hard it's perfectly normal to lean on others. The boy sits curled up on the ground, finally letting everything reach him, and says that now he understands. He looks up at Ryuka and admits that he is not even sure if what he felt for Polaris was true love. He says that his need to protect her was much stronger than anything else, and Ryuka looks completely shocked. Looking back, he tells her, "It's hard to imagine now, but Polaris was actually very weak until she received her gift." He remembers everything, how she lost her mother in childhood and how because of that her father became a cruel drunkard. Then everything went downhill, and he says how she just silently endured all the blows. But in the end, he could not bear to watch her suffering, so he took her away and they fled the village. He settles again by the fire and says that Ryuka already knows the rest of this story from their adventures when they were adventurers. But he looks at the sky and reminds her of the promise they made to his children to become the best in the world together. Although she eventually left him behind, he admits, the only reason he worked so hard was that old promise. The boy recalls how wellness came and declared that he was Polaris's lover. He admits that at that moment he felt all the strength just leave his body and he realizes that this should not have been the reason why he exhausted himself so much. They sit together in the quiet night, just staring into the flames. Ryuka broke the silence and said that she knew it, directly telling him that what he feels is simple envy. The boy sighs heavily and leans back, calling himself pathetic, and Ryuka just looks at him with a smile so th. She laughed and said to him, honestly, it's not such a big deal. He does not fall for it, saying that it is by no means normal to find out that their childhood promise was just a cover for such pathetic feelings. Ryuka looks him straight in the eyes and says that she does not think so at all. She explains that if he is conscious enough to actually say those ugly feelings out loud, then he will definitely be fine. The boy still doubts and quietly asks if it is really so, because he is afraid that he will no longer find any reason to keep trying. The hand directly tells him that there is no reason to change what he feels, and the boy looks at her completely confused and does not understand what she is getting at. She poked him with her finger and explained that he hasn't even listened to Polaris yet, so he shouldn't behave like some selfish person who just kidnapped her and. The boy looks at the ground and says that is quite harsh about him. The hand does not stop, asking if the boy can really be so audacious. He is ready to give up the girl he likes just because of rumors about her alleged lover. The boy just sits with a tired look. But then finally he gathers his resolve, clenches his hand, and admits that deep down he really does not want to give her up. He raises his eyes, a fire burning in them, and says that it was precisely because he liked her that he was able to save her then and that. And that is why, because he still loves her, he wants from now on to be the one who will protect her. When a smile of Polaris appears in his mind, he says he wants to catch up to her level to finally spend time with her as equals. The hand begins to encourage him, keep it up, but he instantly slouches and starts to worry whether he is just being a nuisance because the hand is about to lose it, shouting at him to stop retreating every 5 seconds. Ryuka winked and jokingly pointed at herself, telling the boy that if Polaris abandons him and he ends up lonely, he should just become her lover. His eyes opened wide. He exclaimed in shock. Her sudden, strange proposal completely threw him off balance. She becomes a bit more insistent, leans closer and says that she would gladly become the reason he stays in the fight, but then everything became strange. She began hugging herself and aloud fantasizing that she became his lover, imagining as if she were wrapped in lizard tails or falcon wings. But she doesn't stop there. Blushing, she says that being strangled by a frog's tongue also sounds like a good amusement. The boy froze with genuine horror on his face when it dawned on him. He finally understood why she was so interested in him. He realizes, because of his ability to summon creatures, she thinks she can use his monsters for all her creepy fantasies, and the fact that he can just constantly create new ones is a real victory for her. He began to retreat in panic, begging her to leave him alone and shouting that he definitely does not share her strange hobbies. Ryuka just clears her throat and asks him to put jokes aside for a moment, but the boy looks at her as if unsure whether she is joking at all. Noticing that he is finally himself again, she gives him a big sincere smile and asks if he is okay now. The boy looks around and thanks Ryuka for the conversation, and she just laughs and says that it's nothing serious because this is. It's never fun to see a friend upset. She jokes that she mainly helps so that he becomes famous and spends a lot of money on her by doing this. The boy realized that she was right. He needed to get back on his feet again. He looked at the campfire and agreed, feeling. A new wave of motivation surged over him. He adjusts his glove and tells her that he will give this adventurous endeavor another try. And Yuka simply gives him a huge supportive smile. She is clearly happy to see that he is himself again, so when he Turning to leave, he is already moving when she shouts after him, "Give it your all." He immediately returns to the fight with new gear from Ryuka. He jumps in the air and knocks down monsters as if it's nothing. He just tears through everything in his path. Training and new gear clearly have a huge effect because he moves further. 3 weeks have flown by since he got his new gear, and he doesn't stay in one place for long. He runs through every dungeon he can find, fully focused on grabbing as many new skills as possible to finally reach the top. He begins to show the Tenku skill he got from the Griffin of the Valley. It allows him to literally push off the air with his feet and jump anywhere. And it completely changes his movements. And he has also mastered the Cursed Eye of the Wayland Basilisk, a power that turns everything he focuses on immediately to stone. With these new abilities, it's immediately clear he has become much stronger than ever before. Satisfied with his progress, he returns to check the boards and marvels at what rank he holds in the world ranking after all this exhausting grinding. He finds his name on the screen and he sees that Essen has risen all the way to 50,553rd place. This is a huge jump compared to where he started, and he suddenly realizes there are only a few places left to get into the top 50,000, and this will finally raise him to an average rank. While he is celebrating, Alulu appears and asks how he has been holding up lately. He is glad to see her and tells her that everything is going great, especially because he has already cleared almost all the dungeons she told him about. He is moving fast, so Alulu says that this is really impressive and asks if he is already looking for a new dungeon to conquer. He admits that he is and asks if she has any good leads, but she cast him a glance and said that dungeon crawling is cool, but then asked if he would agree to a completely different job at least once. The boy raised his eyebrows in surprise and asked her if she meant a completely different job than usual. Alulu smiles and asks him to take on a special task that came directly from the guild itself. She says that not everyone knows this, but the guild actually carries out a bunch of tasks that are not just about clearing dungeons, so she promises him that the reward for this will be simply incredible. The boy admits that it sounds tempting, but he looks a bit tense and says that his main goal right now is to really focus on his rank. A serious expression appears on Alulu's face and she warns him. When you are on a winning streak, this is actually the most dangerous time for any fighter. She sincerely tells him that adventurers sometimes need to break away from exhausting routine to not lose their sanity. The boy falls silent for a moment, realizing that she just wants to take care of him. She quickly winked and said that the work is not even that hard, so he should take it as a long-needed break from all the hustle. It seems to have worked, and he tells her that he is ready to take on this job. Alulu is wildly happy and exclaims joyfully, "Finally, I persuaded him to agree to this job." She tells him that she will go prepare everything, and he just nods in response as she leaves. The boy freezes for a second, completely puzzled, and wonders what exactly preparatory work she really needs to do. On the balcony in the shade, a few suspicious guys silently watch how all this is happening. Flashback a few days ago in the huge wellness estate, where someone impatiently asks about the latest news. Wellness is just resting in a robe, with an irritated look asks if that lousy adventurer still hasn't quit. His subordinate says that the boy actually looks more motivated than ever, which drives Wellness crazy. He clicks his tongue and slaps his palm on the table. He takes a sip and looks completely fed up with how this guy is annoying him, so he explains if he wants to break Polaris, the easiest way is simply to destroy the person dear to it. Wellness decides that psychological games don't work, so he has to act directly. His subordinate looks completely terrified by this change in tone, and Wellness indifferently asks, "Maybe just kill that guy," and the subordinate panics, "Isn't that too much?" The subordinate warns him, even with his status, Wellness won't be able to escape the church if he starts killing people. Wellness just sits in a robe and looks bored, barely paying attention to the warning. When the subordinate asks why he has to do it, Wellness reminds him. He was hired not just to observe and write reports. Wellness explains that last time he appeared personally only to mock that guy's pathetic face, but now he mockingly says that such dirty work is exactly for the subordinate. Wellness gives him a choice. Either do the job or you'll be kicked out of the party, and his subordinate finds himself in complete despair. And worse yet, Wellness tells him, "Better hope nothing bad happens to your own family." This leaves the subordinate standing there completely broken while Wellness walks away. Wellness says to the boy with a smile, "Since you are so good, I will make sure the subordinate does not have to get into the dirty work himself." The subordinate was completely confused until Wellness remembered that recently he had found something quite interesting. He reaches into his cloak and pulls out a strange dark sphere, inside which some kind of energy is swirling. The subordinate looks at the object and instantly pales. He definitely knows what this dangerous thing is. Wellness just laughs, calling the sphere his new secret weapon, while they stand near the building. We move to the city streets. People stroll carefree and enjoy the day, completely unaware of what is happening. Alulu appears in her usual outfit, gives the boy a bright smile and apologizes for taking so long. The boy looks at her somewhat surprised, but she does not lose energy and tells him that it is time for them to go. As soon as they set off, he asks why all this request at all, and she casually says, "You will be my bodyguard." He is clearly puzzled why she needs a bodyguard in the city, and she just laughs and says that monsters rarely appear outside dungeons. Alulu's face became serious when she said that monsters are not the only danger lurking around. The two of them walk down a narrow, abandoned alley, and a bald man just watches as they pass by. Suspicious types everywhere, from guys with earrings to people in hoodies smoking in the shadows creating. The boy suddenly realized, the poor district is actually teeming with rough people, so security in the dark alleys makes perfect sense. He is a bit nervous and asks her why she even needed to go to such a place. Alulu gives him a bright smile and explains that the guild regularly checks on adventurers who have stopped working. They mostly visit those who haven't appeared in the guild for a long time, just to make sure everyone in the city is okay. The boy relaxed a bit and told her that it sounds too hard for her to handle alone. He nods as if everything suddenly fell into place. The motivation to be here grows inside him, so he looks at her with a huge, confident smile and promises to protect her with his life for the rest of the day. The group finishes their rounds in the dangerous part of the city, leaving behind dark alleys where suspicious types hide in doorways. As they walk, the boy tells Alulu that she is incredible, not once lost, and even asks if she has a whole map in her head memorized. Alulu laughed and explained that it is simply a convenient gift called Guide that helps her choose the right path. She says it helps her not only find lost things but also locate their owners, so the job has become much easier. This is definitely a different kind of power, not the one most adventurers use, and that, she thinks, is what makes her incredibly interesting. She takes out her notebook and circles the last person on the list, sighing with relief the work is finally done. Returning, she says with relief how glad she is that everything went so smoothly, and the guy simply replies that it's all thanks to her efforts. He tells her, just say the word if you ever need help again, and Alulu gives him a huge smile, saying that she is definitely counting on him. She sincerely thanks him for today's help, and he just waves his hand and asks her to be careful on the way home. Alulu thanks him for being so kind and waves goodbye as they part ways for the night. The guy smiles and waves his hand as he and Lulu finally head off in their separate directions. She thinks, since I'm already out, I can stop by the stores on the way home for a few needed things, so she turns toward the shops. The sun slowly hides behind the city rooftops, and he finishes his errands, leaving. The guy was returning home with a bag full of new things and everyday items, thinking it was a real day off, but just as he reaches the front door, he suddenly freezes. A strange note is pinned right on the tree. At first he was a little annoyed, thinking some kid was joking about his rented house, but the message said, they grabbed the secretary who was with him and demand that he appear in the old group in the back alleys if he wants to survive. He just looks at the paper for a few seconds, completely stunned by what is written there. Realizing that this might be serious, he looked closer at the letter and the small object left nearby. He takes out a hair ornament, the same one that was with Alulu earlier, and at that moment he understands. She really was taken. Without wasting time, the boy rushed out of the house and runs down the street, dropping the packages with groceries and the letter. He is in panic, shouting into the empty air about what could have happened to Alulu while running. Finally, he reached the outskirts and stopped in front of a stone building, whispering, "This is probably the place from the note." He surveys the quiet back alley, notices that there is no one around, and heads to the entrance. Thoughts race through his mind. He tries to understand who could have pulled this off and why they targeted Alulu specifically. He reaches the door and freezes for a moment, hesitating. What is the situation on the other side before? Inside, a boy with glasses is sitting next to Lulu, who is tied up on the floor. The boy kicks the door wide open and loudly shouts her name, ready to do anything to get her back. But the one in glasses only smiled crookedly and said he was glad that the boy had actually appeared. Alulu sits with a blindfold on her eyes, helpless. But as soon as she hears his voice, she immediately recognizes him and understands that it is Essen who came to save her. Essen stands on the threshold and calls Alulu so that she hears he is here to save her while the boy in glasses leans over Lulu and whispers to her to be silent and not move an inch. Essen grits his teeth and shouts at that boy to immediately stop what he is doing right now because it makes no sense at all, so Essen asks, why is he doing this at all if they have never met before? The boy only smiled slyly at the question, acting as if the answer was obvious. He leaned in his clothes and said, this is happening because Essen simply does not give up. Essen was completely confused and said he did not understand anything, but then the name Wellness appeared. Suddenly the man says, Wellness wants Polaris for himself, so he was ordered to get rid of Essen forever. Essen cannot believe that a person of such rank as Wellness is capable of such meanness. He does not understand why go so far. They are already a couple, but the boy with the knife suddenly lunges forward. The guy behind keeps pressing Lulu and says it just happened that way, so now he got the role of the villain. He looks very tense, explaining that Lulu and Essen constantly fight back, and he has no choice, he must kill Essen because Essence looks at him in shock. He realizes that Alulu was just bait to lure him into a trap. And this is exactly how this person always acts. Wellness is exactly the type of guy who helps low-level adventurers only so that they owe him and become his personal puppets, while if someone refuses to participate in his plans, he resorts to violent scares and terrorizes them or makes sure they cannot find another group to join. Finally, for Essen, everything fell into place. The rumor that Polaris and Wellness were a couple was a complete lie, and Polaris just agreed to it to protect Essen. So Essen stands in the dark and feels like crap, knowing that because of his problems Lulu ended up a hostage. The kidnapper holds a knife to Lulu's throat, but Essen raises his head and says that now he finally understands everything. Essen firmly tells that guy to release Lulu right now, especially since he is the only target Wellness really cares about, because his face became cold. He realized, if he does nothing, he is no better than Wellness himself. Essen tries to make him understand, says that even if he kills him, the Church of the Journey to God will still track him down, and he asks the guy if it's true that he agrees to be Wellness's puppet and let everything go exactly as that vile guy planned, and he just shouts at him, "Shut up." The kidnapper stands still, points at Essen, and holds Lulu hostage, saying that this is all he has left, and as long as he keeps Essen exactly where he was ordered, everything will be fine. Essen shouts back, why keep him there at all if he has clearly exhausted all options? He demands that he just surrender and release Lulu. The boy repeats that he is in a dead end and starts laughing like a madman, looking completely nervous as he pulls a small glowing orb from his gear, a creepy smile on his face. Essence froze, looking at the strange object and wondering what it could be when it began to pulse with dark light. He explains that it was a secret backup plan given to him by Wellness. It is a special gem in which a monster is sealed. He releases the sphere, which lightly floats in the air, and says that with this, he won't even be considered a criminal when it's all over because the whole world will just think that a random monster appeared out of nowhere and killed Essen just at the moment when a huge light flashed and filled the room. The giant head of the monster with rows of blade-like teeth suddenly fills the entire room, which the kidnapper just stands with raised hands and laughs as if he has finally won. The beast let out a deafening roar that shook everything around, and Essen just froze and watched, asking himself what kind of creature he had just unleashed. The boy does not calm down and laughs and shouts about the incredible power of this monster. Alulu froze like a stone and silently watched as the nightmare unfolded. The kidnapper points at the beast and brazenly boasts, "This is a volcanic dragon, one of the most dangerous level A monsters." The dragon slammed all its gigantic weight down the floor, shattered, debris scattered everywhere. Essen froze in shock, trying to understand how such a monster could have been summoned at all, but then he orders himself to pull together. He has no time to worry about how it happened. He shouts Alulu and starts rushing through the chaos to reach her before it becomes too late. Everything around is falling apart, and Essen breaks through the flying debris. He runs up to Lulu and immediately asks if she is injured, and she barely manages to say yes from shock. A few steps away, the dragon looms over the kidnapper's body. It looks like it is about to eat that man. Essen asks if she can stand, and she says she will somehow manage, so he whispers that she needs to run while the dragon is occupied, but she is horrified at the thought of leaving him. She is almost in tears, begging him to just go with her so they both can escape, but Essen knows how bad the situation is. He says that if that creature is a real volcanic dragon, it can instantly kill mid-level adventurers. He tells her directly, "We can't handle this, we need to go find high-level masters to help." Alulu tries to argue, but Essence immediately interrupts her because he has already firmly decided. He tells her that he will stay here and hold back the monster himself. Alulu looks completely broken, barely able to understand what Essen just told her. Essen does not take his eyes off the threat and tells her that they must immediately run for reinforcements. Such a monster cannot be allowed to roam here. And when his legs give way, he admits that he actually wants to run too, but understands that the damage will only get worse if he doesn't stay, so he pulls up his mask and explains that it was precisely those times when he decided not to run that made him strong, so he is going to fight. He slightly eases the tension by telling her that he is not crazy and will definitely run away if things get too dangerous. And he smiles at her quietly, promising that while she is gone, he will not do anything too reckless. Alulu froze for a moment, tears glistened in her eyes, and she looked at him with both fear and respect. Finally, she wipes her face and tells him that she understands what she has to do. She rushes away to seek help, shouting in response that she will bring several high-ranking adventurers as soon as possible and begging him not to die, leaving Essence alone with the huge beast. They tell the dragon that it is time to calm down. The huge dragon stands its ground, looking like a real beast, and lets out a roar, forcing. It is clear that this thing exerts incredible pressure. Essen wonders if Polaris really constantly fights such monsters, but the dragon fixed its gaze on him, and Essen realizes it will be difficult for him, especially when Especially when the dragon strikes the ground with such force that it destroys the floor, Essen is thrown back. He takes the full power of the explosion and screams as he is thrown into the air. And he groans in pain, trying to recover, muttering curses under his breath because he can barely hold on. Essen admits that this thing is much stronger than he expected. He is covered in sweat and blood, but he repeats to himself. He must get within the dragon's reach. He knows that if he manages to steal its gift, he might have a chance to. When the dragon tries to trample him, Essen does not stand still. He breaks through the smoke, closing the distance. Finally, a chance appeared. Essen shouted the name of his move, Airshot, and fired it straight at the beast. The shockwave hits the dragon's snout directly, but the force only raises a cloud of smoke, causing it to. It was clear that it did absolutely nothing. Essen lands perfectly and admits that his move didn't work at all, and suddenly he sees that the dragon is preparing for something big, and it completely stuns him when he remembers these volcanic dragons are from the crushing army volcano. Their scales are like steel and they breathe pure flame. Essen realizes at his current level there is no technique that could truly break through. So he decides that he must try something else if he wants to win this clash, thinking that the only way to win is to use the dragon's crazy power against itself, dodging through the chaos. He does not retreat, stands his ground, and challenges the monster. Come on, unleash those scorching tongues of flame right at me. When the dragon breathes fire, Essen redirects the heat and commands the monster to consume its own power, and everything around explodes.